Okay, we're off. Hi, guys.
Video covering a lot of pictures. Photo. I just covered some of these. I didn't even show this photo. Recently, I created a video covering a lot of pictures that looked rather intriguing from the 1840s onward. Here's an example photo. I just covered some of these. I didn't even show this photo. This one's just absolutely magnificent. This is the wondrous Crystal Palace in London.
Hi, Guy. Hi, Phil. How are you guys?
I believe it doesn't exist anymore, if I recall correctly, or they've remodeled it or something. It doesn't have all this glass like it did before. Absolutely stunning. All made by hand. They didn't have automatic glass manufacturing back then. I can't remember how much glass it is, but it's just absolutely unimaginable amount of glass that is in this building, which would have been essentially impossible to create. That was back in the 1840s. You have this massive building made all of glass. We can't even probably make this today. I don't even know if we can make one of those or not. They didn't have the tools we have today or the technology. They somehow managed to make that, though. And there's a lot of other things. There's just absolutely a million things like this. And I just went over some of this over my other channel, like I said, but this is sort of a continuation, not necessarily sort of a part two. I'm going to recap some of the stuff I talked about over there. I actually spent, I think, 30 minutes talking. I might condense it down
Hey,
to 20
Shawnee, good to
minutes
see you,
before I
mate.
release it, and so that I don't put all the stuff that I wanted to talk about over here in it. But there is some rather intriguing new things that I discovered since I created that video. Rather amazing, actually. There are many texts that surround the good book. And apparently, a lot of them say things I didn't realize that specifically talk about the 1,000 years or millennial, as you would say, kingdom that the King of Kings is over. And according to these texts, it would indicate that it already occurred. And what's so odd about it or interesting about it is that I've actually found a lot of things correlating to it that back it up and substantiate it, including through history. And I'm going to get into that in a second here. First, just look at this building. It's just absolutely stunning. This is out in the middle of nowhere. As you can see, it's on a beach. It has a tide. This castle has no plumbing in it. How did they get food to it? They don't even have an official road. They have this makeshift road, which I believe gets covered with water anyways at different times of the day. Absolutely stunning inside of it. You wouldn't even believe how beautiful it is. I mean, it's just amazing, actually.
Wow.
And this is one of those buildings that they somehow managed to.
Wow. How did they build this on that little island?
Make by hand out in the middle of nowhere. Who transferred all these materials? It doesn't even make a lot of sense. And honestly, if you look at the story behind it, it really doesn't make sense. You just like, what? I'll get into that later. We're not going to get into that right now. But I found this, I stumbled onto this video here made by this channel, The Unexpected Cosmology 7,000 Year Timeline. And he goes through some interesting texts. We're talking pseudebiographical texts, which of course I've covered things like that in the past, that point to the King of Kings coming back 500 years after he was here. And there's a lot of things correlating to this. I'm going to show you all these texts. Let's see, here we go. There's actually multiple. There's multiple texts. Okay, we're going to go over a number of them.
Yeah.
And I went through a number of them on my other video as well. I'm going to try to get into some other things as well in this video. I just want to recap some of this because it's so amazing and unbelievable. Okay, so the idea or concept in a lot of these pseudebiographical texts is that there's 7,000 years of history. And obviously the last 1,000 years is the day of rest, which would be...
And Shawnee, the lady that actually gave permission for the birth certificate for Obama's false birth certificate, she coincidentally died in a plane crash like 6 months later.
1,000-year, millennial, as you would say, kingdom, right? Makes sense. So you have 6,000 years of normal history, okay? it says in a lot of these texts that the King of Kings would come down the first time in 5,500 time frame from day one. It'd be 5,500 years. I don't know what.
Oh, now New York's whinging, is it? They didn't mind Texas being overrun with migrants. Now they don't like it back. Gee whiz, what a surprise.
Official time scale that would be, but basically starting at year zero, 5,500 years later. So he would be coming right at the end of this week before the day of rest. So 5,500 years, you only have 500 years before the millennial, as you would say, kingdom, the 1,000 years. Okay. So it says here, and there's a lot more to corroborate this. You'll see what I'm getting at. And there's lots of texts. Here you have first Adam and, of course, Eve, 38. And it says here, but only when the 5,500 years are fulfilled, at that time I will give you the fruit from the tree of, life, and you will eat and live forever, like he did initially in of course, Eden, right? Really interesting. 5,500 years. Okay, so there's one example. Then you got more. You have lots more, actually. This is from second Adam and, of course, Eve as well. It's in chapter, looks like 12. At the end of the great 5 days and a half, concerning which I have made a promise to thee and thy father, I will send my word, logos, and save thee and thy seed. Very interesting. There's another text. Here's yet another one. This is a different book. This is 3 different books.
Sean, any idea how many illegal migrants have flooded your country? Like, I'm pretty sure it's over 1 million refugees since Biden's been in office. The numbers are pretty staggering. I'm not sure what they are, though.
Okay. This is not to be right now, but in future times when 5,000 years will be completed. Then at the 5,500th year, the beloved Son, will come down to earth and bring back to life Adam. Isn't that very interesting? Okay, there's more. And there's even more corroboration that even relates to Revelation. You'll see here in a little bit. I'm going to get into a lot of stuff here. Okay, here we go. Because thou canst by any means obtain it till the last day and times, namely till 5,500 years be past, then will Mashiach, the most merciful Son, come to earth and raise again Adam. Same time, others as well. And it talks about this, I think in Matthew or something at the end of it, that others were raised as well. And when at that time the most merciful Son, come down to earth, he will introduce our father Adam into paradise. What did he say to the man on, we're talking cross next to him? Thou shalt be in paradise. Very interesting. Okay, so there's more. There's actually a lot more. And I'm going to actually corroborate this with history a little bit. I'm going to show you some rather intriguing things that are going to really blow your mind, especially if you didn't see my other video. This is a Nicodemus that says that. Okay, we see this 5,500 everywhere. So what happens at year 6,000, right? Well, that's the end when you have the 1,000-year, of course, millennial, right? And it says here, and Beliar said to Sheol, look carefully who it is that it is Eliu and Shanak. This is Elijah and Enoch, okay? The 2, olive, of course, trees, right? In Revelation. It says that then Sheol answered death and said, not yet are 6,000 years accomplished, so it's not them. So this one's asking another one, is this Elijah or Enoch? No, 6,000 years haven't passed yet. So that's saying that they come at the 6,000 year time frame, which is 500 years after the King of Kings originally came when he was born. That fits into what it says in the last book, in the good book. Okay, and I'm going to actually correlate this to history. You're going to be surprised by this, folks. Okay, now, let's see what else we got here. Actually, I'm going to just start connecting this to history a little bit. Okay, I'm going to surprise you a little bit. So, okay, let's just say this is true. Like I said, I'm not 100% fully convinced this is true, but it is making me more and more wonder if it is. I've actually known about this for over a year, but I didn't hear about these texts until like a day or two ago. I didn't know anything about these texts until recently. I'm like, whoa, what is this? So let me just show you what I'm talking about. Okay, when was the King of Kings here? They say it was like, you know, around 5 BC or something, right? Till like 30 AD or something to that effect, right? Something like that. So now let's take that and let's go 500 years ahead. Where are we at? Where are we at that time frame? We are at the fall of the Roman Empire. Okay, the fall of the Roman Empire. Let me show you one of the popes during that time frame. What his name was. Let me show you his name. We'll see if it looks familiar. We'll see if it looks anything like somebody's name in Revelation.
Oh.
Look at his name.
Sixtus.
Pope Sixtus III in the Vatican. And
oh,
this
Sixtus III, 3 sixes. Great pickup.
Literally means is Pope Sixtus, Sixtus, and another Sixtus. Does that sound a little familiar to you?
Wow.
According to another YouTuber named Armored Skeptic, which apparently he must know something about this, or maybe he's just done a lot of research. I don't know what it is. He had a story about this particular man. He said that
okay, nearly 3 million people already, Shawnee, and how many of them are criminals? I can't see America surviving much longer with this sort of stuff happening. You guys are in extreme danger. It's really worrying.
There's a story or legend around him that essentially says that he required everybody to get a mark to be able to buy or sell in his kingdom. Does that sound a little familiar? Okay, I think that sounds a little familiar as well. That's at 440 AD, by the way. That's 440 AD. That's almost 500 years later. That's literally almost. It's almost about 500 years later. Also, if you like this video, you should check out my website. Link is in the description, grvideos.com. I have lots of awesome and amazing videos like this one here, folks. Link is in the description. 130 plus videos in the free video section, covering all manner of interesting topics like the Divine Council, like the Pantheon, how that relates. So we actually go through and connect the dots with a lot of interesting ancient history. Of course, you got the American Indian history, which is absolutely amazing as well, where it shows that they came from a certain time frame with the Babylonians and Assyrians and the Egyptians, and also, of course, Israelites and just all manner of people were actually a lot of the American Indian tribes. I get into that. We have, of course, the Vatican, which I've covered. Also, we have science topics.
That's only 1 year. Wow. Wow.
Nikola Tesla. And, of course, also a lot of other amazing topics as well. This is actually not the same video. This is an older one I made about a year ago. Just a lot of things in here, folks. And, of course, also on top of that, I have the membership section where I cover a lot of things I can't exactly cover over here. It's in the membership section, and also my latest stuff, and a lot more of my bigger videos. I have 300 plus videos in the membership section in the categories. Lots of different categories in here. It's only $4.95 a month. First month is free. Link is in the description. Of course, also considering all the stuff going on around us these days, folks, you might want to get yourself some food supply. 25-year shelf life. Link is in the description. $2.97 for a month's worth. $7.47 for 3 months worth. Considering the fact that a lot of supermarkets have had bare shelves, you might want to get some, especially $7.47. That's $150 off, even more so off. $7.47. I mean, that's probably what you spend already in a month. So you're gonna get 3 months worth of food for the price of 1 month you currently pay for food every month. I'm sure if you go out to eat a little bit here and there, and you also buy groceries in the supermarket, you're probably spending $7.47 in a month easily. So you could buy 3 months worth. It'll have a 25-year shelf life, just in case one day you end up going to the supermarket and you see nothing in there. You might want to have that just handy, just in case, folks. Link is in the description for that, of course. Also, considering what's going on with the dollar, inflation, a lot of investors are actually now pointing towards gold and silver. Link is in the description. Might want to get yourself some gold and silver. Silver is actually really cheap. I mean, you can easily buy a couple of coins for $5 even, if you're talking about like mercury dimes and things like that. You can buy junk silver. You can buy some of these really big $half silvers for only like $20. Silver's the thing, man. I really like silver a lot. I buy some gold too as well. I actually got something in the mail. I don't even know what this is. I don't even remember buying it. I don't know what this is, man. I got this thing in the mail. I'm still trying to figure out what it is.
It's always just about taking a few steps. Know that you can tackle absolutely anything.
what it is. I'm like, it looks like it's some silver. It's probably like $40 worth. I'm pretty sure it's silver because it's pretty heavy. I also bought others here. I got lots of stuff. You can tell the silver and gold and stuff like that. I'd say might be wise to pick up some of that as well, considering how the dollar's losing value. Link is in the description as well, folks. Also, this book here, The Lost Ways, How Your Great-Great-Grandfather Lived Without Electricity. Now, of course, they might have had electricity during that 1,000 years, but after that, they didn't have the electricity anymore. You might want to have this book just in case you don't have electricity. It has hundreds of pages on how to make recipes, how to build a cellar, how to do things around the house without electricity. Link is in the description. It's only like $30-some. Anyway, let's get back to the video. What else happens at this time frame? Let me show you this. Fall of the Roman Empire, right? We got the fall of the Roman Empire was completed in 476, very conveniently. 476 AD, the fall of the Roman Empire. Right after this, Pope Sixtus III was in, we had the fall of the Roman Empire. What happened after the fall of the Roman Empire, folks? We had the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages period of history, which was what? Okay, the Dark Ages was about 1,000 years. Let me see if I can get a timeline. Yeah, time period. Here we go. 476. Oh, why are they saying 800? I have never seen anybody say 800. Oh no, this is for the West. Okay, then they have another aspect of it that goes to 1500. It's supposed to be 1,000 years. Yeah, here we go. Right here, Middle Ages, date 500 to 1500. Are they trying to change that too now? They like to change everything, as you know. Here we go. Let me get this on the screen a little bit. Why is this not? This is Britannica, and it doesn't even load right. Okay, let's see if I can move that out of the way. There we go. Obviously, Britannica was a very well-known encyclopedia back in the old days. Before we had the internet, we had Britannica as an encyclopedia. It says here it was from 500 to 1500, very conveniently 1,000 years. 1,000 years period of time. Okay. The Dark Ages, or maybe the Light Ages might be the actual correct way to talk about it, I guess. They tell you, though, that it was very dark in medieval times. And people nothing really good happened during that time frame. There's nothing worth talking about. Why do you want to look at that time frame? Of course, all these buildings were probably built back then, you know. You got this magnificent castle built in that time frame. But no, it's not an important time frame, folks. Nothing important happened back during that time frame. Of course. Here we go. Star Forts. So, I mean, look, we have all these pictures. Now, what's interesting is I didn't really realize that Arnold Skeptic actually went into this stuff, but apparently he has. And maybe he's more of a believer than he used to be. Because he actually has a video about me. He and I went back and forth in the past. At any rate, what's intriguing, like I showed you in my previous video, is you'll have all these pictures from the 1840s with no people in them. And some people were commenting saying, well, and this is actually 1970s, by the way. No, this is 1870s, I'm sorry. This is San Francisco, 1870. Buildings look a little bit nicer, didn't they, back then? This library, this is a library, folks, library. This library is in a city of 20,000 people. Does this look like a library you would build for 20,000 people? By the way, I think this is actually a person down here. This little speck, I think, is a person. I could be wrong. I have another picture here. You can see, and this is actually pretty far away from it. You can see it in the background. Here's some more people a little bit farther away, and of course, even a lot more distance back to it. This library, this massive, elaborate, beautiful library was built, I don't know when it was built, but this is 1840, and it's for 20,000. People. I don't know about you, but
Homeland Security, aren't they in charge of FEMA, Diane? I'm pretty sure they are.
That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And getting back to this whole place in the middle of nowhere, if I can show it on the screen better. Okay, this beautiful castle on this island, Lamont Saint Michael. Let me show you this. Where's the original pictures? I think I clicked around a lot. Okay, so here you have an example picture right here. Okay, let me show you something about this now. This beautiful castle in the middle of nowhere with all these beautiful buildings with it. No plumbing, no way to really get food in there. How did they build this out in the middle of nowhere? If you look at the backstory to this it makes literally no sense. It sounds like something Lucifer would have thought of. No joke. I mean, it's literally the most ridiculous thing you ever heard in your life. They say that a bunch of people that were doing a lot of this had a visitation from Archangel Michael, and he said, "I want you to build something in remembrance of me." Because, of course, I don't exalt myself whatsoever, but I want you to build me a castle in the middle of a beach like this. And then, lo and behold, they spent however many years they said to build it for Michael. Does that sound like something Michael would do? If you read any of the texts regarding him, I mean, just go look at Jude 9. That tells you who he really is, and he would never do that. It's so obvious if you read this. I mean, he wouldn't even condemn someone for slander when it was something that clearly was deserved. When he was disputing with Lucifer, he wouldn't even. You see what I mean? Like, he is literally like, even when something is probably okay to do, he won't even do it then. So, and if you know anything about the stories of the Watchers, and if you think about it, the Greek pantheon, you have Zeus, you have Poseidon, you have all these Greek gods, right? If you think about it, the 12 Olympians and all this, and I've covered this before on video, how that is actually represented in the good book as well. If you look at the OT, if you look at, there's some passages that talk about the divine council, okay? And this is something, of course, that's been lost as well. People don't understand this. It is literally a corruption when you're talking about the Greek pantheon. It's the same thing. It's talking about these Watchers that came down. Now, the Watchers, according to what we understand, if you read these books that surround the good book, like the pseudepigraphical text, it talks about them essentially being put over regions. And they were supposed to be pointing people to the King of Kings, but instead they started exalting themselves and wanting people to do this to them, right? And they would have stuff built by the people to them. So what they're saying about Michael here with regards to this castle is something the Watchers would have done themselves. Michael would have never done that. So it sounds like something Lucifer thought of as the backstory for this structure. I mean, it literally sounds like something you had thought of. No joke. And at any rate, so you get kind of the idea. So what did I want to get into here? Okay, let's get into some other things. Now, obviously, if this is true, it means there's quite a few things in history that are not exactly, as you would say, right. Mm-hmm. Okay? It would mean quite a few things, a lot of things. But what's curious is there is actually some evidence of it being the case. And I'm going to show you a few things. For example, there was some issue with the maps. Armored Skeptic also covered this as well. Extraordinarily accurate medieval maps. Well, that's really curious. I mean, Dark Ages maps. Well, it makes sense the Dark Ages maps might be accurate if it's during the millennial, as you would say, reign, right? But no, there was something else he said. There was some intrigue.
And King Charles is behind all of that. We know that.
Issue with maps between 1500 and 1800. And actually, I would have to go look up this video. I was thinking I could find something really quickly. But this is really interesting as well. The fact that the maps are so accurate in the medieval times. I think I'd have to go look up this video and do it. I might have to do a video on that as well. So basically what he was saying is there's some issue where there's clearly some time gap. And he pointed it out by showing certain things on the maps that didn't make sense if what they were saying was true, where they have jumbled history between maps. Okay? Jumbled history between 15 and 18.
Yeah, I remember that. That was yesterday or something,
which would indicate something was changed. Now, again, if this is true, like I said, I'm not saying this is 100% true. I don't know. I'm pretty much still on the fence, although I'm starting to wonder if this is true. And if it is true, I'm going to have to do a lot more research to see if it is. But, you know, some are thinking, obviously, that the millennial, as you would say, kingdom is going to be in the future. Well, this is saying it's in the past, and it's during the Dark Ages, right? Now, what was I going to say? What was I going to say? Okay, so with the maps, I'll end up doing another video probably on that, okay? Because he was talking about how history was jumbled back and forth. Okay, I now remember what I was going to get into. The Vatican. So like I said, okay, you have this Pope Sixtus III in the Vatican right around the time of supposedly the end, 6,000 years. And of course, he, according to at least this YouTuber, which, like I said, I have to go find out where he found this story. He said that they would have to take a mark to be able to buy or sell. So that's an intriguing story that seems to be fitting in line with this whole idea. Now, where is that at? It's in the Vatican. Where is the city on Seven Hills? Doesn't that also relate to the last book in the good book? It talks about Rome. It makes perfect sense. It literally talks about it being in Rome by the city of Seven Hills. And then it has this guy there. And then on top of that, they have this library underneath the Vatican with 53 miles of shelving, 53 miles of books. Books are only this thick, usually, you know what I mean? 53 miles of that. That's how many books they got. And that, from what I understand, they lost 80% of the books. So that's only 20% of the books. So what did they have before that? 200 miles of books? What do these books say? Do they have some history we don't know about? You see what I'm getting at? So, and it makes sense that it would be in the Vatican. It makes sense it would be in Rome because that is where this guy was. Wouldn't that make perfect sense that it would be there? The seat, of course, of potentially Lucifer. Now, some say that he literally lives there. I've done a video, one of my oldest videos is about that. Okay? So this is on my main channel. If you go to my main channel, one of my oldest videos, it's got like 3-4 million views. It covers that. Okay? At any rate, you can go check that out. It's just very intriguing. Of course, people are saying, well, look, it's a long time-lapsed photo. And of course, I don't really believe that because we have photos from the 1850s and 60s with people not time-lapsed a long period of time, as you can see here. And I've seen many photos where it's just 10, 20 years later, lots of people. You can see these are horses moving. They're not standing still for a picture. Okay? You know what I mean? Okay, then you could theoretically argue, well, then they just didn't have that technology 10, 20 years earlier, and they had only the long lapse time photos. If that was the case, you would have seen a blur. These horses would clearly create a blur on this photo. If you go look at any long lapse photos, long exposure, whatever the word is, you can see clearly, you just go to photos, look at time lapse. Walking around in a city, I was looking at it the other day, not even the lights, you don't even need the lights. I think I went like this, people or something like that, and I was able to see, you got like this. This is black and white. You can see it's a blur of people. Here you got another one.
Yeah, sure they lost them.
It shows, obviously it shows more than just the buildings. It shows blurs of people, even in a place like this. And then on top of that, look at how far away this is. People can't walk very far in a time-lapse photo in this photo. I mean, you'd be walking like this all across this whole thing. The time-lapse, even if it was like, 5 minutes, they would walk from here to there or something, you know what I mean? It wouldn't even be that very far. So you clearly see blurs and stuff like that on the picture. So this is my point. My point is that I don't think the time-lapse thing actually holds with this topic either, especially with these pictures that are so far out like this. And even some of them are kind of close up like this one. But at any rate, you get kind of the idea. My point is that I think this is a rather intriguing. And I wanted to get into another thing. This is actually really important. And I don't know if I'm including this part in my video on my main channel. This is actually rather surprising and important. We have a very famous person here that is related to a lot of people, okay, that are well known today. I mean, if you go down this list, you got Charles Darwin, you have lots of famous people, a lot of press in the US of A are related to this guy, including recent people, including famous bankers, J.P. Morgan Chase, for example. Lots and lots and lots. Here we go. Here's one of them right here. God look a little familiar there? Let me zoom in there so you can see his face. Does he look a little familiar? Okay, a lot of people, including others, by the way.
Geez, that one's a bit weird, Di.
Including this guy. All these people are related to this one man. And there's a lot of other ones. And does this lady look familiar? Okay, you see all these people? There's more, and it keeps going and going. And apparently, there's quite a few. Oh, does this guy look kind of familiar? Disney World. Have you ever been to Disney World? Does that look a little familiar? Okay, this man is an architect. Okay, 1893, Chicago Columbian Exposition architect. This man, we're rather curious. Now, like I said, if we're just trying to find something that corroborates this interesting, history that we're talking about here, potential history. This man, okay, apparently, let's see if I got the other stuff here. Do I even have the other stuff here? Open. Let me see if I can find it. Right. Yeah, here we go. I found it. Okay. So this man, his name is Root. His last name is Root. John Root. Okay, John Root. He's the root of all of this, folks. So he was in Chicago. Apparently, Chicago used to be called Chicago. How do you say it? Chicago. I'll just say Chicago. It's something like that. Chicago, something like that. Chicago had a different name, it's slightly different. At any rate, there was a apparent fire or something in the city, and all the buildings were pretty much removed. All the buildings from this millennial, as you would say, kingdom were removed. And this architect built the new ones. Okay? Apparently, he was also behind the world fairs that went all over the world as well. And what's interesting is all these rich, famous people that owned all the railroads, that owned all this, owned all that, were relatives of this guy. Okay? And we have the Smithsonian, we got all these groups, even famous publishers, Rand McNally. All these things are related to him, man. All these people that started the Smithsonian, that started Rand McNally, just all these people, including J.P. Morgan Chase, everything are all related to this one man. Roots is his name. And what's so intriguing about it is they had all these buildings removed, a lot of them removed from Chicago. Maybe they did this in a lot of other places as well. Maybe this is where they started, was in Chicago. I don't quite fully know this. But what's so interesting is all the major things around us are people that are over them, are people that are related to this one man. This one man seemed to be behind some sort of thing to where they're hiding some of this stuff. I don't know. Again, like I said, this is, of course, a theory. I'm not saying this is necessarily true, but I find this to be rather curious how even recent prez, this name look familiar, are all related to this one man. That's kind of weird. You know what I mean? Even the Mayflower apparently was related. Whoever was on that was related to him as well. So, I mean, what in the world? What is this? You know what I mean? It's rather curious. And this, by the way, this is another website. This isn't even related. This is just some random website. Famous Kin. Let me show you here. FamousKin.com, whatever that is. Okay. It's not even related to this author. It's just some website that has all these people listed that are related to him, which is quite a few people, including Walt Disney. It's like everybody you know that's famous is Richard Gere. Richard Gere's are related to this guy. Oh my goodness, who isn't related to this man? Okay, Amy Grant, she's related to this guy. What? Taylor Swift, Matt Damon? Are you kidding me? What in the world? Everybody's related to this dude. Glenn Close? The William? Oh my goodness. What the dude? I didn't even look at this. Look who else. Prince? What Prince is this? Look at that. Brooke Shields. What? Oh my goodness. This guy is related to everyone. Clint Eastwood? Bro. Whoa. This is amazing. Wow, I didn't realize how many people were related to this one man. Oh my goodness, here's another one. Look at this. Who is this guy? He's even related, man. Oh my goodness. Everybody's related to this guy. Wow, this is amazing. I didn't realize how many people are related to this one man. Richard Gere apparently as well. Kevin Spacey also, by the way. Ernest Hemingway. I actually like his books. He actually had some really cool books. Ernest Hemingway. Even he's related to him. Like one of his books is really awesome. Old Man by the Sea. That's a really good book. That's a really amazing book. Wow, dude. Humphrey Bogart. Oh my goodness, dude. Man, everybody's related to this man. Dude. Might be something there. I don't know. This is just kind of intriguing. Of course, you could say, well, everybody's related to somebody. You know, okay, I guess you can make that argument, but that seems to be quite a few people that are very, very high up and famous that are related to one man. I mean, I guess you could say, like, yeah, well,
it does look unusual.
Everybody's related to him because he had all the kids and nobody else could. You know, you could make some arguments like that or whatever. I don't know. I mean, you could argue this away if you wanted to easily. You could say, look at history books. What? You're going to tell me all the history books or something wrong? I'm not saying all of them. I'm saying that just some parts of it, and well, it's a decent amount. Some of the recent history, I would say anything after 1500 to 1850, you might have to question some of that. I would say a lot of the more ancient history, though, is probably not really that far off. I mean, honestly, if you look into it, I mean, there might be some stuff in there, of course, but it sounds like, you know, maybe some of what they did is they took some famous people and jumbled the stories into different time frames a little bit. They might have done some of that. I think this is true. Like I said, this is just a theory. It's a rather curious theory. We do have a lot of interesting things that seem to corroborate it. I don't know what to say about it. Kind of what some of you guys think. Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.
Okay, that ended pretty quickly.
Blew into me.
I have never been. They think they're getting out. He thinks he's going to ascend into the heavens, take his rightful place on the throne. I explain in my book why I think that's what George Washington's painting represents. And this happened on January 6th, the day that Christians around the world celebrate the revelation of the godhood of Jesus in the form of the Christ child. America's temple gets a message in the form of a horned one desecrating this temple. Hey, we're here, we're coming back.
All I could see was this light coming in. The Holy Spirit went. It blew into me.
I have never been the same since then.
That was it. And,
I was born again. Welcome to the Weird Christian Podcast. I am your host, Samuel Delgado, and this is episode 51. I interviewed Derek Gilbert on his new book, The Second Coming of Saturn, The Great Conjunction, America's Temple, and the Return of the Watchers. We talk about the Great Conjunction that happened at the end of 2020 that was dubbed the Christmas Star, and how that is actually what occultists believe the event showing that we've now completely entered into the age of Aquarius. How that ties into the second coming of Saturn, also known as Apollos or Kronos, ties that into biblical prophecy and shows how we see this entity show up all throughout the Bible. And eventually we wrap that up in showing how that actually related to the insurrection that happened on January 6th of 2021. So, with no further ado, let's get weird. Welcome to the show. Why don't we start off just by hearing a little bit about how you grew up and how you came to know Christ?
Well, it's kind of a boring story. I was born and raised in Chicago, and parents took me to church every Sunday. So went through a pretty, I think, typical 1960s, 1970s upbringing, middle class family. Churches were pretty, I guess you'd say, high church. Organ music, stained glass windows, that kind of thing. Protestant denominations, but not the kind of church where you hear people shouting amen or anything like that. That was frowned upon. That was considered rude in those denominations. So it was, even though I accepted Jesus as a...
Wow, shouting out amen or hallelujah is rude in them churches. Wow. That's
as my
us
Lord
out of
and
the
Savior
picture
when
then,
I was in the
guys.
6th grade. A neighbor who was a high school student at the time from a Roman Catholic family, interestingly enough, had been attending a storefront, I think Independent Baptist Church, if I remember correctly, just a couple of blocks away from where we lived. And one Monday night, I think she took me to, or maybe it was a Wednesday, I don't even remember, but it was to a showing of the film called Thief in the Night, which is about the rapture.
Yeah.
And that literally scared the you-know-what out of me. So I asked Christ into my heart, but really didn't understand what that meant, and wasn't really discipled. And, I cast no aspersions on our churches or my parents or anything, but we were just sort of going along and trying to, be nice to other people, and, not really understanding that Christianity is more than about being nice. There's a supernatural war that's going on. So it was not surprising then that when I got off to college, I kind of fell away. I stopped going to church on Sundays because, that's boring. And it's a lot more exciting to stay up real late on Saturday night when you're in college doing things you shouldn't ought to be doing. So went into a career in radio broadcasting while I was in college, actually, kind of worked my way through college doing part-time radio, and was hired at a top 40 station in Peoria before I was really technically even out of college. So as soon as I graduated, I started working the overnight shift at a top 40 station in Peoria. Spent, 8 years in full-time radio, worked my way from Peoria to Philadelphia, Little Rock, Arkansas, St. Louis, and got fired the day before Thanksgiving, 1990, by a long-distance telephone call from the owner in New York. That was kind of an eye-opener. But by then, I'd already begun to start thinking, I wasn't really comfortable in my own skin. And it was because I was trying to be somebody else, trying to get the approval of the world, just kind of ignorant of the scripture where Jesus told his followers, "Woe unto you when the world speaks well of you." Chasing the worlds of Joe Rogan is finding that out right now, by the way. This was not the way to happiness, or in a bigger sense, to secure your eternal future. So that led to a period that was a little difficult in my life. My first wife decided to leave, and we just married young, and we were not really made for one another. That's just what it comes down to. But I had physical custody of our daughter, who was 6 at the time, and so I had to try to figure out what it was I believed, because I couldn't figure out how to teach her what she should believe or why I should teach her certain things if I couldn't explain to her why certain things were right and wrong. I mean, the Bible seemed like a good moral compass, a good guide to ethics and morals, but what if it was just like these shows on TV are saying, that this is just this was made up? There were books of the Bibles that were left out. Jesus really didn't die on the cross, but the apostles carried him off out of Jerusalem before he actually died. What if those things are true? So I started digging into the Bible to research apologetics, and come to find out there are some very good reasons to believe the truth claims of Christianity. There is evidence for our faith. Jesus did not ask us to follow him blindly. The evidence is there, and the deeper we get into the archaeological record, the more we find this to be true. So,
okay, that usually means my Wi-Fi's dropped out, guys. We're back.
that was eye-opening, and it was about that time, as I was trying to figure out where next to go in my life, that thought, okay, I don't want to be a single man for the rest of my life. And so this was like 1998, 97, and 97. And so 20% of America is online. and I found an online dating site, one of the sites that's still around today. Early adopters, 20% of America's online. Sharon and I connect.
Wow.
And we find out later that when you do the initial survey that helps them match you up with somebody you might be compatible with, they ask you all these questions. What are you looking for? Hair color, smoker, non-smoker, religious preference, da da da. How far are you willing to go? And physical distance, that is.
Yeah, yeah.
And I clicked the little box that said 200 miles. I figured, okay, 200 miles, that's okay, 3.5 hour drive. Yeah, that if she's worth spending the rest of my life with, I'd be willing to go that far. My friends thought I was crazy. It's like, what? There's like 2.5 million people within 50 miles of St. Louis. That's not enough for you? Yeah. So anyway, 200 miles, Sharon's profile stuck out. Okay, she's a writer. She's a scientist. Ooh, she trained to sing opera, professional singer. Okay, I'm a kind of a hobbyist. I've been singing with the Barbershop Harmony Society since high school. Love a cappella music. So science fiction fan. Oh, and she loves the Three Stooges. Score. So anyway, we met and connected very quickly, and then realized after we had met and had decided, okay, this is what we want to do. We're going to get married. We met for the first time in September. We married in January, and we just celebrated our 24th anniversary. So yeah, the Lord knew what he was doing. But the physical distance between my home and her home, she was in Bloomington, Indiana at the time, and I was living in suburban St. Louis, was 195 miles as the crow flies. So, 5 more miles, 6 more miles, and we never probably would have met. So, hand of God, I'm convinced was at work in all of this. So, but as we met, Sharon will tell you this, as we met and we got to, talking about various and sundry things, she's got a degree in molecular biology. So she has an understanding of the intricacy, the body at the cellular level, the molecular level, and how silly it is to believe that this just all happened by accident. And as we're discussing this today, Samuel, story just came out that there's a new book due to be published within the week that shows the evidence that Charles Darwin actually plagiarized the theory of evolution from another naturalist who published the same work some 30 years earlier or something like that. A fellow by the name of
I knew that.
Now. Anyway,
because Darwin's family had the money to publish a book under Darwin's name. That's why.
The story.
He ripped some guy off for the theory. He's right there.
My update for today, but and Darwin's wife kind of admitted it. Said, "Yes, it's your child, but my husband nurtured it like it was his own." The title of the book that's coming out is "The Greatest Science Fraud in History" or something to that effect. Anyway, I actually argued that Darwinian evolution was not incompatible with the book of Genesis, not understanding at the time that if you don't have a literal fall from grace, if there wasn't a creation that was created in a state of grace and then an original sin through the rebellion of Adam and Eve, that of course makes God just capricious and unjust, because how can he start punishing humanity at this point for something that's been going on forever? So Darwinian evolution is not compatible with the creation account that's in Scripture. And there's plenty of evidence. I'm not an expert in this, but there is plenty of evidence that the theory of evolution, macroevolution, one species transforming into another, just cannot be true.
Yeah.
But setting that aside, I argued the point with Sharon to the point where it wasn't really healthy anymore. I was the high school debate team captain 2 years running, qualified for the Illinois State Championship tournament 2 years running. I've had to learn that my enjoyment of a good argument is not necessarily the way to maintain a happy and healthy marriage.
Isn't that true? Sometimes you just gotta stay quiet about what you know so you don't come across as a know-it-all. I understand where he's coming from here completely.
Relationship, but
sometimes it's smart just to shut your mouth.
We are happier today than we've been since the day, than we were the day that we were married. But as I have grown, and I credit this to the Holy Spirit, not to my own intelligence, we've been led in this direction. You know, Sharon is a scientist by training. I've got an interest in science, a love of science. She knew from a very early age that Bible was true, that God was there to for us to speak to and to answer to us if we listen, you know, for that still small voice. I wanted the evidence, you know, show me the evidence. The evidence is there. And that seems to have been the direction that God has led us as we've now published, had published by Defender Publishing now. I lost track, 6-7 books in the last 6 years. And all of them are essentially going to the same direction, which is the Bible really only makes sense fully if you read it with as much understanding of the worldview of the prophets and the apostles as possible. They knew what their neighbors believed, and there are a lot of weird parts of the Bible that only really make sense if you begin to understand what their neighbors knew and what the prophets and the apostles knew about their neighbors' beliefs. So that's kind of it. It's just been sort of a slow, ongoing process. It's not a very exciting testimony where, you know, there wasn't like a moment where everything just sort of, if the closest thing to it was reading when I was studying the apologetics of, or studying apologetics through books like The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel and Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Those two are very influential on me. Reading the account of James, the half-brother of Jesus, who was martyred by the Sanhedrin around the year 62 AD. So we read in John chapter 7 that even his brothers, even Jesus' brothers, didn't believe in him.
Yeah.
And yet 30 years later, James was willing to be martyred rather than recant his belief that his half-brother was God in the flesh, was the Messiah.
Amen.
What changed James's life? Well, in 1 Corinthians 15, we read that the risen Christ appeared first to the women, then to Peter, and then to James. And that might do it. It's like, yeah, I know my brother was dead, but now he has appeared to me again. And suddenly James became, as we read in Paul's letter to the Galatians, that James and Peter were two of the leaders of the church at Jerusalem. When Peter went to Jerusalem to ask around, hey, is what they taught me in Damascus true? In Galatians, he writes that he spent 15 days with Peter and James. Paul was investigating. Is this true? What's the evidence for it? And so for me, that was like a sea change moment there. But again, overall, it's just been sort of a long process. I've always been kind of a nerd, loved learning, loved studying, reading dry, dusty academic papers. You know, it's like detective work, you know?
Yeah.
And you find these nuggets in these papers written by secular archaeologists, secular epigraphers who read these ancient texts, and you plug them into the biblical worldview. And it's like, okay, now we can understand why God said to Moses, here, turn around. I want you to cross the Red Sea here and watch this. I'm going to part the Red Sea. It was a message to Baal. And there are other things like that all through the Bible. So anyway, short story long, that's essentially my testimony.
No, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm glad I got the long version of the short story. And it sort of, it makes sense. I mean, it is sort of logically as you are, you know, reading your writing now, you use so much about showing that proof. It makes sense that, you know, that was how, you know, God ended up revealing himself to you, was through that truth. And I remember coming across some of Lee Strobel's work years ago, which is fantastic for anyone that is into apologetics or needs a great resource for that. So that's really cool. And I love hearing about you and sharing it as well, because I just think it's fantastic. I watch you guys on you have a few different programs that you guys do, but you guys have a your Revelation program that you guys do, and of course you guys write together, and I just think it's so fantastic how well you complement each other, and you both just seem so into the Word of God. You guys, you know, you're bonded in that way. You both kind of have that, you know, that same nerdy love for this stuff, and I think it's really interesting because I think I look at you and I feel like, and I've kind of followed your books and your writing over the years, and you see how it's progressed, and it's really just gotten deeper and deeper into this one subject or one aspect of looking at the Bible through the ancient Near Eastern and the supernatural view, which is fantastic. But I think at this point, I would consider you like an expert in this field, and it's like you said, because you dig deep into all sorts of different sources, and just what you've uncovered is incredible. So you can see that that sort of diligence of being able to just read into that dry stuff. But it's we need people like that in the body of believers, because we need people. One, for as far as apologetics, it's amazing for defending our faith, but just making those connections between what's going on in the physical world, in the supernatural world, I think it helps to understand the Bible so much more. And once you start to unlock this, you really just read the Bible almost in a totally different way. Which is good. I remember reading Michael Heiser's Unseen Realm. I know you reference him a lot, but that was, for me, like a light bulb that went off. I remember I just devoured that book, and I hardly ever read a book more than once, but I remember reading it again and just devouring it the second time. And, I referenced it, here and there. But anyway, that's really cool. I'm excited to get into your book. But before then, I want to talk about Skywatch. How did you get in touch with Skywatch, and talk about kind of what you're doing there now?
Back in 2004, 2005, early 2005, Sharon and I had started writing. And Sharon's been writing for a long, long time. I was convinced that I couldn't write, and Sharon got me to try, and turned out, hey, I can actually do this. So I wrote a couple of novels early on, which we've republished since. One of them, which was updated because it became frighteningly relevant all of a sudden. It deals with a pandemic and an alleged cure that those who do not wish to take are then placed in camps. So try not to get you canceled here. Anyway. We had a publisher at the time who wanted to know how we were going to promote our books. Like, wait a minute, you're the publisher. We thought you were going to do the promotions. Well, then they got a little spooked because we were diving into topics that they didn't want to touch. Like, hey, you got like crop circles and aliens in your book. Well, yeah. So anyway, we parted ways. But the one method we'd come up with to try to market our writing was a podcast. It was PID radio, which stands for Peering into Darkness. And so in 2005, for about 10 years, then we kind of revived it when COVID hit again for a while. We interviewed a lot of guests and talked about a lot of strange topics. That led to an interview program, because I enjoyed doing the interviews a lot more than Sharon did. She just, the two of us just sit down and talk, and it just flows. Again, with a professional radio background, I can tell you that there are a lot of morning show teams that work really, really hard to try to get close to the natural rapport that God already knew we had when he brought us together. So we started doing that program to market our books. Our first show was, okay, here's our books. And what do we do next week? So the following week is, well, let's talk about the stuff that inspires us to write. And that led to getting into, crypto politics and things like that. Then we started doing interviews and interviewing people like L.A. Marzulli and Guy Malone, our missionary to Roswell, and then Tom Horn. And so we interviewed Tom Horn, I think, for the first time in 2005. Mike Heiser was a 2005 interview. And that's how we kind of got plugged into this community. And we interviewed Tom a number of times over the years. When he and Gary Stearman and Bob Ulrich of Prophecy Watchers put together the first Future Summit in Branson back in 2011, they asked if we would come and set up our podcast gear and interview some of the speakers. And then they got the idea to stick a camera in that room and recorded the video and used that to create some extra DVD content. So they invited us back in 2012 and 2013, and in 2014 they asked us if we'd be interested in speaking. And so we did that, and so we started getting invitations to speak at conferences, 2014, 2015. By this point, we had moved from, where were we, we were in St. Louis, then we moved to Columbia, Missouri, because I had my midlife crisis, had to go back into radio. I've been out of radio since 92. Then in 07, we wound up moving to Indiana, went back into radio, or back into steel sales, which I had been in for a while. Then from inside sales to outside sales, moved to Illinois. And then from there, was starting to feel like I should be doing something else. I was getting frustrated. Not that the company I was working for was treating us badly. They treated us great. But I just felt like I should be doing something else. And so I called Tom Horn, called Bob Ulrich, just to say, what do you recommend? I just feel like I'm banging my head against the wall here. And they said, well, be patient. We can't tell. Come October of 2014, Tom reveals that he's got this plan in the works to put a Christian television ministry together. And he invited us down to the Ozarks from where we were in Illinois. Had Sharon on. She had just written a book about the West African Ebola outbreak at the time, called Ebola and the Fourth Horseman of the Apocalypse, and interviewed her. Gary Stearman was the original host of Skywatch TV as one of the pilot episodes. And while we were here, they asked, would we be interested in coming down here and partnering with them in the ministry? So we kind of looked, did some math on the back of an envelope, and then Joe Horn took us around the ranch, that the property that has become Whispering Ponies Ranch, which is the ministry that Skywatch TV really finances, and explained the plan there, which is to partner with Royal Family Kids, work with children in foster care between the ages of 9 and 11, and basically finance it through the work at Skywatch TV, the books and the DVD sales. Makes it possible for Royal Family Kids to bring children to the ranch where these miniature horses are used as therapy animals without having to pay a dime. So all of the costs are covered. And that is what we do at Skywatch TV. So as soon as Joe shared that with us, because Tom wasn't even going to use that as a lever to get us to come over, but Joe shared it with us thinking that his dad had already told us about it. And, as soon as Joe shared that with us, it's like, yeah, we're in. Yeah. So that's how. So we had known Tom and Joe and the family through connections at these conferences and interviews for about 10 years at that point. But still kind of stepping out in faith to an extent. But we had the same sense of confidence as when we got married back in '98. So it was not really that. It was not as scary as some people thought it might be.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. You guys have expanded recently. It seems like you've just grown.
Or the stream's boring, Diane. That's something I've got to worry about sometimes. But not many have jumped in tonight. So, yeah, it's not the stream.
Steadily since then. I think I probably started following Skywatch. I think Tom Horn wrote, I think the first book I read was Ex Vaticana, but what came out before that is the Prophecy of the Popes. That's when I started kind of following Skywatch. And it's truly expanded since then. It's funny you mentioned your podcast. I just listened to an old, I just recently read Temple of Time by David Flynn. And I was trying to look for resources of interviews of his. And I think when you interviewed him back in 2005, it was like one of the only interviews I could find on that resource. But boy, oh boy, it was a great interview. It's an incredible book. But it's crazy to see kind of that journey that God's taking on to get where you're at. But talk a little bit about kind of what you're doing at Skywatch now, because I know you guys have recently expanded to do several different shows, and I know you're doing a few different things.
Well, we had kind of foisted Sci Friday off on Tom. One Friday, my daily update, we just decided we're going to talk about science news, and we'll call it Sci Friday. Tom is out of town, so he can't stop us. And he said, hey, great. So that started back in late 2015. So we did that for about 5 years. But when Tom and Joe were getting ready to, and we kind of did the same thing with Unraveling Revelation too, a couple of years ago. Sharon said, we really need to do a deep dive into end times prophecy and apply this divine counsel research that Mike Heiser has shown us through the unseen realm and reversing Hermon. And surprise, when you start digging into the book of Revelation, you find John knew all these Old Testament prophets. He knew Ezekiel and Daniel and Isaiah and Zechariah. All that stuff is in Revelation. So we got to go back to Genesis in order to understand Revelation, which makes sense because it's the foundation and the roof of this house that is our Christian faith. And sadly, a lot of churches don't teach anything prior to Abraham or anything after the Epistle of Jude. And even most of Jude is pretty weird when you start talking about angels and chains and darkness until the day of the judgment. A lot of churches just stay away from all that stuff.
Yeah.
So you've no foundation, you got no roof, all you got a bunch of walls. And, you know, anyone who knows anything about construction, if you got 4 walls open to the elements like that with no foundation anchoring it, the house is going to fall down pretty quick. So that's how we and again, we kind of foisted it on Tom, and thankfully Tom was like, well, as long as you talk about the book offers and stuff so that we can continue to finance Whispering Ponies Ranch. Great. So we kind of do that on our own. We set up a little studio in our house to do that. But when the time came to make the transition for Joe Horn to take over Skywatch TV, I took the opportunity to pitch an idea that Sharon and I have been kicking around, because we've been sort of taking Sci Friday from a scientific, a hard science direction or emphasis to a more of a supernatural emphasis for some time. And so we said, well, here's an idea. Can we continue doing this program, but maybe rebrand it and focus on these weird aspects of the Bible, since that's really where our interests are in terms of scriptural research. And Tom had wanted to do something like this all along. So, again, it was the God thing.
Yeah, Diane, I couldn't help it.
Tom was like, yes, great. So they built this wonderful studio that looks like Sherlock Holmes' library, which, again, was perfect because without knowing it, they didn't know when they tasked Sharice Parton, who's sort of our lady who does everything here, office manager. She's you got a problem? She's like, oh, hon, don't worry your pointy little head about it. I'll get it fixed. She designed the studio, wouldn't tell us what she was working on. And then she finally showed me a Pinterest file with some ideas. And they were all from Sherlock Holmes' library at 221B Baker Street in London. I said, you want to see some more pictures? Because I got them right here on my phone. We were just there last summer because Sharon is a major Sherlock Holmes fan, has been since she was a kid. That was her dad's nickname for her. When we married, she had the complete annotated edition of the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the entire Holmes canon. So it was wonderful.
Wow.
But he's basically tasked us with, just explore these weird things. And he gives us a lot of creative flexibility. We came up with the opening credits, the closing credits, which, again, just look like you're in this deep archive, like, Warehouse 13 or whatever. And the topics so far, he seems to be very happy with. We talked with L.A. Marzulli about the Nephilim and about the E.T. Gospel, and Timothy Alberino about the angelic realm and the existence of other sentient species in God's in God's creation. And now we've got a series that we're in the middle of with Dr. Doug Petrovich about hard evidence from Egypt for the Israelite sojourn, which has been overlooked by Egyptologists for decades. Yeah. And so things like this, and it's just, somebody asked me last year,
Diane, I don't think we've got time left for a big revival. I don't think there's time left. I think we're going to go into tribulation like literally any month within the next 2 years. I reckon we're stepping straight into tribulation. There's no time for a big revival. I wish there was, but I don't think there's going to be.
If you could design your perfect job, what would it be? It's like what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, you can tell you're just like,
oh, she got upset at you and said everything's not in the Bible. Everything we need to know is in the Bible, so she's incorrect there.
Like a kid in the candy store. It comes across. Yeah. That's fantastic. Cool. Yeah. Well, like I said, I love everything that you guys are doing at Skywatch. It's fantastic ministry. I'll put links in the show notes of the episode for those that want to check out all those resources. as well as your book that I can't wait to get into. Like I said, it's really built upon a lot of the research you've been doing. So give us the title of the book and tell us what prompted you to focus in on.
When I first started following Trump, because I was a Trumper at the beginning, when I first followed him, he'd do his rallies, but he'd always play Rolling Stone's Sympathy for the Devil, and that always made me really suspicious. Why would you play that at a rally for a political event? Because Sympathy for the Devil mentions how he cons politicians, etc., how the devil cons politicians. So yeah. And apparently Make America Great Again, MAGA, that's the highest rank in some sort of witchcraft team.
This one god Saturn.
Well, you're right. It's been built on the research that I've been doing into the religions of the ancient Near East, Mesopotamia, the Levant, which is Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan. This one character kept kind of hovering in the background. And it finally dawned on me as we were looking to, what are we going to write for 2021? Excuse me, tickle in my throat. That as we approached the winter solstice of 2020, we had this conjunction in the sky between the planets Jupiter and Saturn. And this was significant because those two planets represent the two kings of the Roman pantheon.
Shawnee, let's be honest, no one went to jail that Trump said will go to jail. Hillary wasn't even investigated, yet that was one of his platforms to get in power. He also used WikiLeaks. What's that guy's name from WikiLeaks? He also used him and then left him with it. So Julian Assange, yeah, he used WikiLeaks to bring down Hillary Clinton, but then wouldn't not prosecute Assange. And Assange is sitting in a British jail now still.
In the ancient world, Saturn was the old god, king of the Titans, known to the Greeks as Kronos, who was overthrown by his son, the storm god, Jupiter, Zeus to the Greeks. But when you go further back in ancient Near Eastern history, you see that same pattern.
Yeah, Diane, she'll label you a conspiracy nut. Did Tracy understand where you're coming from?
It was repeated over and over again, where Enlil of Mesopotamia was replaced as chief of the pantheon by Marduk, who not technically a storm god per se, but he had storm god attributes to him. So it's a very similar story. El in the Canaanite pantheon replaced by Baal. Even in the Hurrian and the Hittite pantheons, you had the same story where Kumarbi, the father of the gods, was overthrown and replaced by the storm god called Teshub or Tarhunta. Same story, just with different names over and over again. The Phoenicians, in the Norse pantheon with Odin and Thor, it's a very similar story repeated over and over again. And yet, this entity, Saturn, Kronos, who was banished to Tartarus, seemed to have faded from history. Well, it struck me as we approached what the astrologers were calling the Great Conjunction of the Great Mutation. That the time was right. In fact, I probably, if I'd been smart, written it 6 months sooner so it could have come out on the conjunction, but instead of the year following. But anyway, the reason this was significant in the occult realm for New Agers and astrologers is that this conjunction, which was the closest observable conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn since the year 1226, occurred at 0 degrees of the constellation Aquarius. Now, that's significant because in their minds, this represents the full entry now of humanity into the age of Aquarius. So that 50 years after the Fifth Dimension sang that popular song, this is the dawning of the age. Okay, we are now fully into the age of Aquarius, which according to astrologers, in classical astrology, was ruled by the planet Saturn. And this represents in their minds a decentralization of power and a less emphasis on materialism and material things. And I don't think it's coincidence that a month after that great conjunction on the winter solstice of 2020, which we were told by the media was the Christmas star, it was neat seeing those two bright points of light in the sky, but it would not have been enough for me 2,000 years ago to hop on a camel and travel for 4 months across Mesopotamia. No, that was a supernatural thing that the wise men saw. But in their minds, this represents the dawning of a new age.
China records as the three wise men come from China. Do you remember I played God in Ancient China, Diane, where it mentions Genesis, the Tower of Babel, the flood, everything like that, and it mentions the three wise men, and apparently they're from China.
The timing of the World Economic Forum's Great Reset, the announcement of their Great Reset a month following, where they laid out their program, I don't think is coincidental. We as Christians understand that our futures, our fates are not defined or controlled by the movement of the planets across the sky, but there are some very wealthy, some very powerful people who do believe this. I mean, as evidence, just look at the Ronald Reagan. Nancy was setting a schedule according to her astrologers' recommendations. So Ronald Reagan, trust me, was not the only one. There are some very wealthy, very powerful people who do look at this and the time is now for the Great Reset. This return to a day when Saturn ruled and life was easy. Now this harkens back to a couple of things. First of all, there was a poem written by the Roman poet Virgil around the year 40 BC, just after the assassination of Julius Caesar, which was intended to flatter his sponsors, his patrons.
Yeah, sometimes, Diane, it's like beating your head against the wall. You just don't bother anymore.
The guys who paid for his lifestyle, one of whom was a fellow by the name of Gaius Pollio, who was the consul in Rome. Consul was the highest elected official in Rome at the end of the Roman Republic. This was during the transition period from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire. Okay, Julius Caesar was dead. He was replaced by the second triumvirate, which was Octavian, who became Caesar Augustus, Mark Antony, and a guy named Lepidus, who was, history's more or less forgotten Lepidus. Anyway, Pollio was the one who was flattered by this poem written by Virgil, and it talked about the start of a new golden age, with Pollio's reign beginning. And so he wrote, justice returns old Saturn's reign with a new breed of men sent down from heaven. And the end of the Iron Age and the beginning of the return of the Golden Age. Now, this was based on earlier writings by the Greek poet Hesiod, who was roughly contemporary with Isaiah, 8th, 7th century BC. Hesiod wrote that there were 4 ages of history. There was a golden age when Kronos, Saturn, ruled in heaven and life was wonderful. Then came the Bronze Age, or the Silver Age, where things weren't quite as good. People were, children were babied, and they weren't very productive.
What I meant by that is we don't need buildings to be a church, to have a church. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there also. That's us, guys. So we're a church unto ourselves.
It was, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't as good as the Golden Age. Then came the Bronze Age, where things got really violent and bloody, and then finally the Iron Age, where Zeus reigns and the gods made us, make our lives difficult. And I wish I'd not been born in this age. And but so they were looking for a return to the Golden Age when Kronos ruled in heaven. Now, Kronos and Saturn, same entity, different names, as the king of the Titans.
See, Diane, she goes to church. And she doesn't even know we're in the last days. So that church is a dud. Stay well away from that church, whoever you are. Yeah, there you go, Diane. There you go. Proof.
The group banished to Tartarus by the sun, the storm god, Zeus, Jupiter. In Peter, 2 Peter 2, verse 4, he tells us that God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell. But the Greek word is Tartarosis. So he cast them to Tartarus, not Hades, not Sheol, not Gehenna. Tartarus is the only place, the only verse in the Bible where that word is used. So we know that there are a group of angelic beings are in Tartarus, which in the Greek mind was a special place in the netherworld reserved for supernatural rebels. So Jude confirms this, by the way, that these angels are in chains. He calls them eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. That's a reference to the day of the Lord, or the day of Yahweh, when he comes back. It's Armageddon, in other words. It's not a literal 24-hour period. It's a period of time in which God's judgment is poured out on an unrepentant world. It culminates at Armageddon.
Yeah.
But at the end of this period, the abyss opens up. Toward the end of this period, the abyss opens up, and these locust-like things in Revelation 9 come flying out, and they're led by a king over those in the pit, who's called the Destroyer, Abaddon or Apollyon. So it occurred to me, like, well, wait a minute. We know that there are angels in the abyss, in Tartarus, and we know, according to the Greeks and Romans, they had a king whose name was Saturn, Kronos. And if we look at the book of Enoch to identify in the Hebrew mind who these angels were, who were then confined to the netherworld, according to Enoch and according to Peter and Jude, their leader was
Wow.
Shemyaza, chief of the what?
Diane, you don't even have to be Christian to know there's a big food crisis coming. Wow, she's very ignorant.
Who came down to Mount Hermon and led this rebellion that created the Nephilim, who became the demonic spirits that plague the earth to this day, destroyed in the flood of Noah. So it made sense to me that Saturn was this leader in the pre-flood era, Shemyaza, and he would also likely be then the king over those in the abyss who come flying out in Revelation 9, the Destroyer, Abaddon and Apollyon. So that's kind of where the theory is behind this book. And again, it was prompted by this research that I collected, hadn't done anything with, and the great conjunction on the winter solstice of 2020, which symbolizes in the minds of occultists, New Agers, the transfer of power from Jupiter back to Saturn and the beginning of a new golden age.
Yeah, so interesting. The convergence kind of was what brought that, and really, truly, this book is almost like a convergence of all that research. So one of the first questions I have, since you brought up Tartarus, and that's where these entities are now. So the Watchers that fell, pre-flood, were judged and placed there until a later time. However, we see these same entities that are being worshipped by pagans. How is it that they're being worshipped, yet they're also being kept under chains?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I can only speculate because the Bible doesn't tell us specifically, but I assume it's the same way that a mafia boss or a gang leader can still control what happens on the streets while they're behind bars in prison. They've got minions. They've got these demonic spirits who can still communicate with them. In fact, there's some hint of this in Isaiah 14 and in Ezekiel 32, where Isaiah 14 talks about the shades, which in Hebrew is the Rephaim, and the Rephaim is just the term applied by the Hebrews to the spirits of these mighty men who were the Nephilim, destroyed in the flood. And it turns out, and as Sharon and I found when we researched our book, Veneration, the Rephaim were well known to the Canaanites who surrounded ancient Israel, and they were worshipped and venerated. That's the title of that book. The Isaiah 14, which I argue does not refer to Lucifer. Let me back up. That does not refer to Satan. In other words, Lucifer is not Satan, in my view. I think Lucifer is this entity, Shemyaza, Saturn, Abaddon, Apollyon. The spirits, the shades, the Rephaim rise up to greet this entity when he's thrown out of Eden. Now, when you look at the Old Testament depictions of Satan, which in the Old Testament in Jude, not Jude, but Job chapters 1 and 2, he's also mentioned in Zechariah. The term is not even a proper name. It's actually a title. It's Ha-Satan, the Satan. It's the adversary, the accuser. He's never depicted as being in the netherworld. He's never depicted as being in the underworld. He's still got access to the throne room of God. He's in the throne room of God with Job. He's in the throne room of God, accusing the high priest in the days of Zechariah, whose name was Joshua, interestingly enough, Yeshua. But this entity in Isaiah 14 and in Ezekiel 28, the parallel chapter, is described as being tossed out into the netherworld. Ryan Pitterson, interestingly enough, in his book, The Final Nephilim, arrived at the same conclusion, that the Assyrian, who is mentioned in several books of the Old Testament, like Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 31, Micah chapter 5, in Ezekiel and Isaiah is placed in the netherworld. So I think this entity in the netherworld with the spirits of the Rephaim, and in Ezekiel 32, they're called the chiefs of the Gibborim, or the mighty chiefs, the chiefs of the mighty men, are in the midst of Sheol, while this character, the Assyrian, or I argue in my book, it's actually a name, Ashur, the chief god of Assyria, who's just another name for Saturn. Because unlike the Satan in the Old Testament, every place you read the Assyrian in the Old Testament, that definite article, the Hebrew word ha, is not there. It's Ashur. So this character, Ashur or Enlil or Saturn or Dagon or El, different names for the same entity, is in the Bible and out of the Bible, placed in the netherworld, in the stories that are told about him by the pagans of the ancient world, and in the Bible, where in Ezekiel 31 and 32, he's described as being like a tree in Lebanon, who's sucked down to the abyss in the flood. In Isaiah 14, he's cast down. How art thou fallen, O Lucifer, son of the morning? And in Ezekiel 28, likewise, he was cast out of Eden, cast off the mountain of God, and winds up in the netherworld. So given that you've still got these spirits, these Gibborim, these mighty ones in Ezekiel 31 and 32, and I spend some time digging into that in the book, I think they're still in contact with these demonic spirits, these spirits of the Nephilim called Rephaim by the Hebrews. And I think those demons are essentially carrying out, they're laying the groundwork for what he thinks is his return and his final ascent to place his throne above that of God.
Wow. So this is actually kind of leads me into another question that I had, because reading through your book, you, as you already mentioned, go through how we see really the same entity, Saturn, by different names.
So she was a patronizing bee as well. She patted you. Oh, man.
Throughout different cultures. And what we tend to do, I myself included, reading the Bible, you'll read through all these different entities, Baal, and you'll just
wow, so she admitted she was wrong, Shawnee. That's cool.
That all into this entity, Satan, Lucifer. As you mentioned, Isaiah 14, everyone attributes that to Satan, the devil. And I'm reading your book, and it almost seems like, and really outside of kind of the work you're doing and a few other scholars doing, we typically don't hear about this concept of there being other gods. We kind of, like I said, just think of just Satan. He's the head honcho. There's demons, and that's it. So do you believe in, you already mentioned that Satan as a title, do you believe Satan as one of these gods?
Yeah. He's identified in Matthew 12, verses 22 through 26 as Baal. Jesus is confronted by the Pharisees who say, well, he's casting out demons by the power of Beelzebul, which means Baal the prince. And Jesus said, if Satan casts out demons by his own power, how will his kingdom stand? So they called him Baal. Jesus says, well, if Satan casts out demons by his own power.
Yeah.
But it tells us two bits of information. Not only is Satan Baal, and again, this is confirmed in Revelation 2, where the letter to the church at Pergamum, where Jesus talks about, I know where you live, where Satan dwells, or Satan's seat. That's a reference to the great altar of Zeus. Well, Zeus, like Baal, like Jupiter, is a storm god, same entity by a different name.
Shawnee, I had a debate with a Catholic, and she said there's a Queen of Heaven. I said, no, there's no such thing as Queen of Heaven in the Bible. And she was adamant. And I said, well, okay. So I said, go and look it up. Next time I saw her, she said, yeah, you're right. There is no Queen of Heaven.
A different culture.
So it's good when I actually listen and go and check it out, isn't it?
So I think what we see in the Old Testament, if we assume that the Satan, which is a job title in the Old Testament, is the same character in Genesis 3, and the same character that Jesus identified as the storm god of the Canaanites and the storm god of the Greeks and Romans in the New Testament. Okay, let's assume that he's the same entity. His role, his character, if you will, changes somewhat from the Old Testament to the New. In the Old Testament, you've got this other entity, Saturn, who is, again, called by many different names, and I go through all of those in the book and show the evidence that, secular scholars understand that, yeah, same entity, different names. I mean, the ancient scribes from, say, Assyria and the Hittites and the Egyptians would put together these lists, to help other scribes translate from one language to another. They would make lists of gods. Okay, Anu equals Uranus, that kind of thing. Yeah. So it's documented. This is not me just looking at things and saying, well, this looks like that, so it must be the same. No, there's 550 footnotes in the book. One of the things, I mentioned being on the captain of the debate team back in high school. I researched a lot because I hate being wrong. I really, really hate being wrong. And maybe that's a personality defect. Being embarrassed when I get wrong is really, really grinds me up. And so I try really, really hard not to be wrong. But the character of Satan in the Old Testament is as the accuser. He's like the prosecuting attorney for God's people. But by the New Testament, we see Jesus saying he's got a kingdom. And certainly by the time of the book of Revelation, we see that Satan is the leader of this rebellion. And the other entities that are taking part in this, the beast, who we believe is the spirit of Leviathan, chaos, the mystery Babylon, who in all probability is the ancient goddess worshipped as Inanna, Ishtar, Astarte in the Bible, and this character who comes out of the abyss, Abaddon, Apollyon, Saturn, Kronos. I think they all are in it for themselves. They're aligned with each other in that they have rejected the authority of God. But I think all of them have aspirations of being the one to sit on that throne elevated above the throne of Yahweh. It's like a political party. They all may hate the president from the other party, but they all want to be the next president. Yeah, that's fantastic. And you laid that out pretty well in your book, Bad Moon Rising, which I thought was fascinating. Also very thorough. Yeah, for those that like you put the footnotes actually at the bottom of the page in your books as well, which makes it really helpful to see exactly where your sources are, and you're definitely thorough in doing that. So, yeah, you know what you're coming up with is not something just in your imagination. It's documented. So, you mentioned Inanna. Can you make a connection between you did in your book, Queen of Heaven and Virgin Mary? Yeah, that's something that again scholars have put together. It's well known that she was referred to as the Queen of Heaven in ancient Mesopotamia, Sumer, Akkad, Babylon. She was called Astarte in the Bible, or in biblical times. In the Bible, she's actually called Ashtoreth, which is a Hebrew technique they would use. They would switch the vowels. Like, for example, Baal, they would call Bosheth. One of Saul's sons, who was called Ishbaal, which means man of Baal. In the Bible, he's called Ishbosheth, which means man of a shameful thing. And Astarte, rather than her actual name, you see Ashtoreth, which is, again, it's a pejorative. But in Jeremiah, we read about eating the raisin cakes for the Queen of Heaven. It's documented in the where I found it was in the Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, the DDD, which is a wonderful reference material. There's other material out there. Essentially, the veneration of this Queen of Heaven, Ishtar, Astarte, Inanna in the ancient world, and it was essentially transferred to Mary in Roman Catholicism. And I don't mean to belittle the faith as a whole. I was actually married to a Roman Catholic at first and converted to Roman Catholicism before I really had a firm grasp of theology. So I know that there are a lot of people who are part of that church and that religion who understand that their salvation comes by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. But it is also true that since the 5th century, at least, that church has brought practices from the pagan world into official doctrine. Scholars have shown how Augustine, who wanted to eliminate the practice that we described in our book Veneration, of summoning the ancestral spirits, which were just actually demons, to the monthly ritual meal to feed the ancestors, was brought into the Roman Catholic Church by Augustine, who said, well, the spirits of the saints, the righteous who've gone on before, intercede for us in the natural realm as well. And that's where the practice of veneration of saints came from. It came from the practice of venerating the Rephaim, the Nephilim, a practice that's been documented in ancient Mesopotamia going back to about 2400, 2500 BC. Likewise, this veneration of the Queen of Heaven, which was devoted to Inanna, Ishtar, Astarte, Aphrodite.
I was just thinking about the Queen of
Heaven. It entered into the Christian church through the Roman Catholic Church as the veneration of Mary.
Yeah. The Witch of Endor, you talk about that in your book. And of course, as you know, it's a very fascinating passage in Scripture that, it's deep. You can go, there's a lot more questions, I think, than answers here in that passage. But one of those questions is, why was she surprised in the way that she was? So what's your take on that?
Well, she was not expecting to actually see the spirit of Samuel. Saul went to her and understood what she was and who she was and what she was about. What I found really fascinating, and I credit Sharon for pointing me on this, she stumbled across a husband and wife archaeologist team from UCLA who had been doing work at a site in northern Syria called Tel Mozan, which is the Hurrian city called Urkesh. And at Urkesh, it was found that there was a ritual pit called an Abi, A-B-I, about 40 foot deep. They've only excavated down a little more than halfway. And of course, they had to stop 10 years ago because of the civil war there. But this Hurrian, Hurrian, practice of summoning gods from the underworld through the Abi was transferred into the pagan religion of the Canaanites, and the word was changed from Abi to Ov. It's in the Hebrew as Ov, and that's the word that is used for the medium or the witch of Endor. She's the Ov of Endor. But only recently.
Yeah, that King Charles, that would have went down really well.
Have scholars realized that the Ov does not really mean medium, it means the ritual pit. And what they would do at these pits is they would dig a hole, they would describe a magic circle, maybe drop flour around it for protection, the same way a modern day Wiccan would use a circle of salt as a protection against whatever's going to be summoned in the circle. But they would then offer a sacrifice and summon these spirits from the netherworld. And that's what the woman at Endor was doing. Saul went to her and said, I want you to call this guy out of the netherworld for me. But she cried out with a loud voice. This is described in 1 Samuel 28, because it was the spirit of Samuel, not the familiar spirit that she was expecting to see, I think. The Bible doesn't tell us explicitly, but there's a reason that she cried out in surprise. And then
that makes sense. Wow.
You fooled me. You're the king and you're going to kill me now. And, Saul was like, no, I need to hear what Samuel's got to say. And of course, Samuel was there to deliver a message from God. Now, most of us were raised in church, I think, being taught there's no such thing as ghosts. And except for this incident in 1 Samuel 28, there's no biblical example of a human spirit ever interacting with the living. But God can allow it on special occasions if he's got a special purpose that needs to be accomplished. And so here in 1 Samuel 28, there's nothing there that tells us that it was any spirit other than that of Samuel. But again, I think the reason that this... and the New English translators actually render the term Ov this way, the owner of the ritual pit. The reason that she was startled was because it wasn't the spirit that she was expecting to see. She was expecting a spirit, just not the spirit of Samuel.
Yeah, so it's, by reputation, she knew what Samuel was about, and therefore she knew she's probably going to get in trouble. Wow. That's great. So you talk about polemics in the book. Can you explain what that is and give some examples?
A polemic is essentially it's an argument against someone or something, and it's probably not a good term. I probably should have a better definition at hand. But a polemic is, say, for example, when Isaiah uses the phrase rider on the clouds to describe Yahweh, in a sense, he is using that as a polemic against the god, the chief god of the Canaanite pantheon, Baal, who's described as the cloud rider. So it is an argument being made by someone against someone else or something else. And sometimes it's deliberately inflammatory, sometimes it's deliberately provocative.
Yeah.
But we see these polemics against other gods through the Bible if we know what we're looking at. For example, in Zechariah chapter 4, there's a reference there where God is speaking through the prophet Zechariah, and he says, "Who are you, O great mountain? For you, before Zerubbabel, you will be made a plain." And Bible teachers, when they teach on that verse, will often describe that as an example of Zerubbabel being given the power. He was one of the leaders of the Jews who returned from Babylon. Zerubbabel being given the power by God, or being empowered by God to overcome the difficulties that lie before him in rebuilding the temple. But that misses a very important point, which is that the chief epithet, the main nickname or title of the chief god of Mesopotamia, the father of the Mesopotamian gods, Enlil, was Great Mountain. And the Jews had just returned from spending more than a century in the middle of Mesopotamia. They knew very well who the Great Mountain was. It was Enlil, the father of their pantheon. In fact, when we read Ezekiel chapter 1, and his famous wheel within a wheel vision with the four living creatures, and he's being given a vision of the throne room of God. Credit Mike Heiser for pointing this out. No, sorry, Giorgio, this was not aliens. This was a vision of the throne room of God. The imagery described by Ezekiel in chapter 1 would have been recognizable to anyone in the ancient Near East. They would have known this is what a royal throne looks like, guarded by these strange, cherubim-like creatures. But Ezekiel makes a point of saying that this vision took place over the Kibar Canal. And he mentions it again 4 other times in the book of Ezekiel. The vision I had at the first by the Kibar Canal. What's significant about that? That canal ran right through the city of Nippur, which is in what is now the center of Iraq. But Nippur was the home of the temple of Enlil, the E-Kur, the house of the mountain, where the Great Mountain would call.
Soon there's going to be no parties. It's just going to be the one world government. No Democrats, Republicans, Liberals, Labor, none of that. All the one world religion.
All of the gods of Mesopotamia together once a year. So they would decree the fates of the land every year. God showed Ezekiel a vision of his throne directly over the temple of the chief god of Mesopotamia. And so, again, that's sort of a hidden polemic, if you will. But it was, when you begin to understand what the Mesopotamians believed about their gods, all of this other weird stuff starts to make more sense. So, we see it in Isaiah, and the references there. Plenty of references in the Bible against Molech and the practice of sacrificing children in the fire to Molech. Those are easy to spot. Some of them are a little more difficult. You've got to understand what the pagans of Mesopotamia believed, but it's in there if you care to look, and it's really, really satisfying when you start spotting these things. Like, oh, now that makes sense.
Yeah, I've heard someone kind of crudely refer to it as like divine smack talk, because using like a familiar.
That's a better definition. I like that. I'm stealing that.
I'm not sure who said that. It didn't come from me, but he's using those titles, and then really asserting his divinity And so it's really showing for anyone that's not worshiping the true God, Yahweh, that they're worshiping someone that's subservient to him.
Lesser Elohim.
Yeah. So you also talk a lot about locations that, as you just did, and the significance of them. One of those being Mount Hermon, which you believe was the. We'll talk about Mount Hermon and how significant that is. What are some of the what are some of the things that happened at that location?
Mount Hermon was believed to be the domain of the Anunnaki as far back as the time of Abraham. There's a text, an old Babylonian text of the Epic of Gilgamesh that refers to the cedar forest around Hermon as the secret dwelling of the Anunnaki, who were at the time believed to be the chief gods of Mesopotamia. Later, like the Titans of the Greeks, they were demoted to the netherworld, which is why I conclude in the book that the Anunnaki and the Titans are one and the same as these sons of God from Genesis chapter 6. But according to the Book of Enoch, which is written during the Second Temple period, that was the period between the time of the Jewish return from Babylon and the destruction of the temple by the Romans in the year AD 70. The Book of Enoch placed the rebellion of those watchers in Genesis chapter 6, the sons of God from Genesis 6, on the summit of Mount Hermon. Hermon is the northern border of Israel. It is the border between Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. And it has had a supernatural connection for a long, long time. Sharon discovered as she was researching her series of supernatural thrillers, the Red Wing Saga, a fellow by the name of Charles Warren, Sir Charles Warren. He climbed Mount Hermon in 1869, and he found on the summit of Mount Hermon a temple. Now, he didn't find the temple. The temple had been there. People knew about it. It's called Qasr Antar. But inside the temple, he discovered a stela. That's an inscribed stone that had been overlooked for about 2,000 years. It was written in archaic Greek. And so it probably was after Alexander the Great's conquest of the Middle East in the 4th century BC. So somewhere around 300 BC, say. But in the Greek, it reads something like, by order of the Most High and Holy God, those who swore an oath proceed from here. And of course, that's a reference back to what we read in the Book of Enoch about these 200 watchers who swore by mutual oaths and imprecations to proceed with this rebellion and take wives of human women and create their own race of hybrid children. Watchers, of course, is a class of angel. They're mentioned in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 4. So apparently a fairly powerful type of angel, distinct from the messengers, the Malachim. But this again, well known, even as a site of spiritual contact, a portal, if you will, as far back as the time of Abraham. Wow. The Babylonians were aware of it because, again, their text of the Epic of Gilgamesh places his confrontation with the monster called Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest, at Mount Hermon, and then he and his friend Enkidu penetrate the secret dwelling of the Anunnaki. So something about that mountain has had some special significance for a very long time, and it's mentioned over and over again in the Old Testament. And I designate or mention a couple of references to it. Even the Canaanites understood that this is where their chief god El, the father of their gods, held court. And so there was something significant about that, and the fact that it overlooked the land of Bashan, which is to the south and to the southeast of Mount Hermon, which was believed by the Canaanites to be literally the entrance to the netherworld, was also significant. El's tent, he was believed to live in a tent, sort of like Yahweh when he was, in the tabernacle. He lived in a tent. His tent was located at the source of the rivers, at the midst of the springs of the two deeps, or the double deep. And there's some scholars who think that might even be a reference to the Sea of Galilee. And as scholars are now finding over the last 40 years, some of the myths and stories from the Canaanite.
Diane, we didn't panic the first time, so that doesn't include us.
Religion, documented by those texts found at Ugarit, which is northern Syria. It's on the Mediterranean coast, just south of the border with Turkey. Place it had a special importance on that region between Mount Hermon and the Sea of Galilee. That it was known that that was a place where the honored dead would be buried. So it's really odd because you also find that modern archaeology has discovered so many dolmens, which are these megalithic funerary monuments, often made of 3 big slabs of stone, 2 upright slabs, and then a tabletop slab across the top. There are so many of them between the Sea of Galilee and Mount Hermon on the Golan Heights that it must have been like a giant necropolis back in the day. Archaeologists say you cannot talk about dolmen fields, a place where you get like a grouping of 2 or 3 dozen. You can't say dolmen fields anymore because they found so many. You can't tell where one ends and another begins. So something about that region, that area, from Mount Hermon down to the Sea of Galilee, had special spiritual significance in ancient times. It was known to the Canaanites. There are references to it in the Bible, and like Psalm 42, Psalm 48, Psalm 68, which I go into in the book. And of course, that's the location of Gilgal Rephaim, that big megalithic series of concentric rings with the central hub, which was over a buried dolmen, which is within sight of Mount Hermon. When you're at Gilgal Rephaim, you just look north, and it's like, oh, there's that great big mountain right up there. And as we found just a couple of years ago, it's a quarter of a mile from this feature on the landscape, which was probably created naturally. It's about a 3/4 of a mile long serpent-shaped ridge that's 20 to 25 feet high, but it's covered with about 140 megalithic tombs, which are all clustered on the back of this serpent-shaped ridge, and not down on the floor of the land around it. They put them all up on top of the serpent-shaped ridge. And again, it's in the middle of the ancient land of Bashan, which in the Ugaritic language meant serpent. The place of the serpent, we just found a 3/4 of a mile long serpent mound.
Yeah.
3 miles long, wow.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. And you can't, what's wild to me about that is you can't really see the serpent until you're in the air.
Well, yeah. But we drove right past it on our tour in 2019. We were literally close enough to throw stones out the side of the Jeep to hit the side of this ridge, except we were all looking out the other side because that was the direction of of Gilgal Rephaim. So when we go back, we're going up on that ridge. Credit to our friend Doug Van Dorn, who actually has been on the back of that ridge and took some pictures of some of the tombs up there. But I spotted it in Google Earth, and then come to find out that Doug had found it like 6 years earlier and put it in his book, Giants, Sons of the Gods. But he found it the same way, Google Earth.
Yeah, it's incredible what we've been able to find through Google Earth. And just, you don't really think about certain sites having supernatural significance, but, once you start connecting like we've never been able to before, easily, anybody with a computer can connect these sites and see how it seemed to be very deliberate where these things were built. So sure. It's wild. So I want to talk about some of these events that perhaps we've read about in the Bible that we're maybe missing a huge supernatural element. One that I really enjoyed reading about in your book is one that I think everyone's very familiar with, is Jesus walking on water and Jesus calming the storm. Talk about that from the supernatural point of view.
Well, we had the opportunity to hear Mike Heiser teach on this during our 2018 Israel tour, as we were on the Sea of Galilee, talking about the imagery of the sea in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, representing chaos, the primordial forces of chaos. Leviathan, his equivalent in the Canaanite religion was called Yam, which is the Hebrew word for sea. So the very word for primordial chaos is the word that Hebrew, to this day, is used to refer to the ocean. So Jesus walks out on the Sea of Galilee, or when he was in the boat and he calms the storm. Twice he essentially displayed his mastery over this body of water, which, if there's a scholar named Baruch Margalit, who I cite in the book, The Second Coming of Saturn, who is the one who suggests that the double deeps of El's abode might be below the Sea of Galilee, which gives extra significance to it. Because not only does Jesus subduing the sea, and if you want to go further back, back up 1,400 years to Moses parting the Red Sea. In the Canaanite religion, Baal becomes the king of the pantheon by defeating the two other sons of El, Mot, the god of death, and Yam, the god of the sea, in single combat. Which, by the way, that same tension is echoed in the Greek pantheon with the little brotherly tensions between Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon. It's not coincidental. It's basically drawn straight out of the Canaanite religion. So anyway, Moses is directed by God in Exodus 14 to turn back and camp at a place called Baal Zephon, and that's a reference to the mountain sacred to Baal, Mount Saphon, which is near ancient Ugarit. It's in Turkey, but just across the Syrian border, right on the Mediterranean coast. It's where Baal's palace was located. God has the Israelites stop there, wait for the Egyptian cavalry to catch up, and then God says, now watch this. Right in front of a place sacred to Baal, Yahweh demonstrates his mastery over Yam, Chaos, Leviathan, and then destroys the Egyptian cavalry as it tries to follow. Likewise, 1,400 years later, Jesus calms the storm on the sea, walks across the sea, demonstrating his mastery over it. And again, that is mastery over Baal, because Baal couldn't do that. Mastery over Chaos, Leviathan, who in the book, Sharon and I argued in our last book as well, suggests that that's the spirit of Antichrist, the beast that emerges from the sea, from the abyss, from chaos in Revelation 13. And if El's abode is actually to be found at the source of the double deeps below the Sea of Galilee, it also demonstrates his mastery over that entity as well. It's like a triple whammy: Baal, Leviathan, and Shemiyaza, Saturn, all at once.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. And if you're not familiar with that, you think of this as just like a cool, neat magic trick that Jesus is doing. So what you've done is you shed so much light on what's going on here, on another aspect of Jesus' ministry that we hardly ever talk or hear about. So I think it's so fantastic. All right, I want to move into our capital and what happened on January 6th. This was one of those things when I first heard you talking about it on Skywatch, it just absolutely blew my mind. That was an event that was, everyone had a different take on it. I certainly didn't hear this take on it anywhere else. I want you to talk about your take on as far as what happened at the Capitol on January 6th.
Well, I have to give Sharon credit for this again, because she pointed this out in a chapter that she wrote for Tom Horn's book, Zeitgeist 2025. And I just took it and kind of went from there. Tom has written extensively in his books, Apollyon Rising 2012, Zenith 2016, about the occult symbolism in the art and architecture of Washington, D.C. in general, but the Capitol in particular. Didn't even think I was going to get into that in this book, because I thought, okay, well, Tom has written about the symbolism of the Washington Monument outside, representing the generative member of Osiris, and the dome being the womb of Isis, and then that symbolizing at some point engendering the spirit of Antichrist there inside the United States Capitol. But as I started looking at this and looking at what happened on January 6th, inside the Capitol, you've got a lot of imagery, and I'll kind of skip over some of that, but I think most significant is the painting on the inside of the Capitol dome, the apotheosis of Washington, with symbolism drawn from ancient Rome. First, you got the visitors in the rotunda look up to see that painting, and that was inspired by the Pantheon in ancient Rome, which was a building with a dome and an oculus that opened to the sky, designed by its architect Marcus Agrippa to represent the apotheosis, or the becoming of a god, by Julius Caesar. So come 1860, you've got the architect of the Capitol commissioning Costantino Brumidi, an Italian painter, to put a painting depicting George Washington as a god ascending into the heavens. And I talk a bit about this, the symbology, the wrapping of his legs in purple cloth and what that represents, why that's related to Saturn. But what happened on January 6th, where you got this intrusion into the Capitol, described by political leaders and pundits in America as a desecration of America's temple, or our temple of democracy. Representative Liz Cheney actually called it the most sacred space in our republic. Really? I mean, come on. This is an office where our elected officials are supposed to conduct the business of the people. It is not a sacred space. But that's how it was described by the majority leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and by any number of other representatives of both parties, and many commentators in the political class.
Diane, eventually they'll completely ban channels like mine, Christian channels. Eventually they'll completely ban them. We all know that's coming.
They view this as a sacred space. What most Americans aren't aware of is that the name of the United States Capitol, with an O-L rather than the capital, A-L, which is a capital city like Washington, D.C., is named for the Temple of Jupiter in ancient Rome. When Pierre Charles L'Enfant, the architect of Washington, D.C., in 1799 was laying out Washington, D.C., and I didn't even go into the Masonic symbolism and the way the streets are laid out. Tom Horns covered all that. I didn't need to repeat or revisit that. But I didn't know, and I didn't find in Tom's book, the name of the Capitol coming from the name of the Temple of Jupiter. And remember, we mentioned earlier, as Jesus said in Matthew 12, Revelation 2, the storm god, Zeus, Baal, Jupiter, is Satan. Now, I don't think Thomas Jefferson, who insisted on naming it, I mean, the architect wanted to call it Congress House. Jefferson insisted on calling it the Capitol because the Temple of Jupiter was the Capitolium. I think Jefferson just wanted to evoke images of the ancient Roman Republic, because they were trying to build a republic. This was a new experiment, hadn't been done since the Roman Republic more than 2,000 years earlier, 2,500 years earlier. I think that's what he was going for. But if we as Christians believe in the influence of principalities and powers, something was whispering in Jefferson's ear. So on January 6th, you had this group that invaded the temple, or America's temple, according to the pundits and the political class, led by a guy in a buffalo hat. Now, whatever it was, I think we can agree that this was not an insurrection, because an insurrection would have had some sort of a clue as to what we do next. We've invaded the building. Now, how do we take over? There was none of that. They were there for selfies. They were expressing their frustration with the political class. Anyway, the significance of January 6th, and Sharon, again, is the one who pointed this out, is that it's remembered by Christians around the world as Epiphany. In the Eastern Church, they call it Theophany. It's the day, traditionally, sometimes called Three Kings Day, the 12th day of Christmas, when the three wise men arrived at the manger to pay homage to the king. This was the day on the Christian calendar where we celebrate the revelation of God incarnate in the form of Jesus. And on that day, America's temple was desecrated by a guy wearing a buffalo hat. Now, why is that significant? I pointed out in a previous book, Last Clash of the Titans, that the imagery of the bull is a consistent thread through the gods, the pagan gods of the ancient world.
Especially Baal.
The name of the entities, the Titans, the old gods of the Greeks, who were punished when they were overthrown by the storm god and sent to Tartarus. The name Titan probably derives from an ancient Amorite tribe, an Amorite tribe named the Tidanu, which in turn got that name from the Akkadian word for bull, or aurochs. In fact, Kronos, the leader of the group, his name probably comes from a Semitic or Hebrew word, karen, or karnu, meaning horns, the horned one. Kronos, Saturn, this entity, the the leader of the Titans, the bulls, if you will, in the netherworld. They think they're getting out. He thinks he's going to ascend into the heavens, take his rightful place on the throne. I explain in my book why I think that's what George Washington's painting represents. And this happened on January 6th, the day that Christians around the world celebrate the revelation of the godhood of Jesus in the form of the Christ child. America's temple gets a message in the form of a horned one desecrating this temple. Hey, we're here, we're coming back. I don't know that this young man, Jacob Chansley, really knew what he was doing. But again, if we as Christians admit the possibility that the supernatural realm may have an influence over us humans on earth, we got to look at that event and say, you know, the odds of this being a coincidence are really, really small.
Yeah. No, you just can't make that up. I mean, you had the conversions happen in December to bring in this age of Aquarius, and then the state of our, you know, just thinking back to a year ago, the state of our country at that time.
Yeah.
And I never really, it didn't dawn on me until you pointed out that they are referring to the Capitol as a temple, which is bizarre. That's why in the world would you, I mean, there's nothing about that building that would constitute it being a temple whatsoever.
Except the fact that it's named for the temple of Jupiter, Satan, in Rome. So, you know, again, you can't make up these coincidences. This is, I think Tom Horn was right, that this temple represents a building through which they hope to engender, or at least symbolizes the engendering of the spirit that will return in the last days. Now, Tom believes it's the Antichrist. I think it represents the return of the destroyer, Apollyon or Abaddon. And then
I meant to stream that one, didn't I, Diane? I might stream that tomorrow and fit it in with Mike from around the world.
Most of us are aware that besides the giant obelisk, and it's the world's largest obelisk, by the way, in the Washington Monument, that imagery is echoed in St. Peter's Square in Rome, where you've got another obelisk and then St. Peter's Basilica. But if you travel around the world and you pass a mosque, look at every mosque just about on planet Earth, and you see the same imagery repeated at nearly every single Muslim place of worship on Earth.
Yeah.
And if I had realized this when I wrote Bad Moon Rising, 4 years ago, I would have made a slightly different conclusion on who I think Allah actually is. I now believe that Allah is this entity. He is the destroyer, Saturn, Kronos.
Wow. Well, regardless of where you land on that, I think as Christians, we can feel, this spirit in our country, and there's a rebellion, there's a lawlessness, and it sort of feels like a house of cards, to be honest. Wow. So let me say thank you for coming on. There's a lot more we could talk about, and I will put those links in the show notes for anyone that's interested in hearing more and getting the book and reading it. But I want to ask you, before we do any closing thoughts, is there another upcoming project that you can tell us anything about?
Well, Sharon and I are continuing to work on our new television program, The Bible's Greatest Mysteries, and we got some really interesting things coming up there. We're planning a tour of Turkey in the fall, which will be a small group. So, but we plan to visit the Churches of Revelation, a site known in the ancient world as the Plutonion, reference to Pluto, the god of the dead. So literally the gates of hell. And Göbekli Tepe, which is called by archaeologists the world's oldest temple. Our friends Dr. Judd Burton and Dr. Aaron Judkins have been working on a book on the Watchers' influence at Göbekli Tepe, so we plan to visit that. That'll be in late October. But Sharon and I have started work on another book that is under the working title, The Gates of Hell, which we will conclude is not literally a specific location or series of locations on planet Earth, but is in fact the human heart. You give permission to the enemy to come in, and that becomes the gateway through which these spirits enter our time-space domain.
Wow. Okay, awesome. Well, any closing thoughts before you close us out in prayer?
Well, the good news, I think, is that the Bible tells us that this entity will come back, but he's only got a very limited amount of time. And this was surprising to me, and I've been very edified to see that other guys that are smarter than me have picked up on this as well, that the amount of time that this entity, the destroyer, will get at the end to torment those without the seal of God on their foreheads is limited to just 5 months. But this book ends, and I think this is evidence that our identification of this character and his colleagues as the sons of God from Genesis chapter 6 is correct. When you look at the end of Genesis 7 and the beginning of Genesis 8, we read that the ark of Noah was on the water for 5 months. And a 30-day lunar calendar, that's exactly 150 days. It's not coincidental. The amount of time that these entities were compelled to watch as their children, the Nephilim, the giants, the mighty men who were of old, were being destroyed in this flood, that's exactly how long they will get to take revenge on those who have not accepted Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior.
Wow.
So whether we're out of here before all of this takes place, which I believe, or if I'm wrong, and we are going to go through all of this 7-year period called the Great Tribulation, know that this return of old Saturn and his reign will only last for 5 months. And if you've accepted Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, he can't touch you. As powerful as this entity is, and I suggest in the book, speculation, that he may even be more powerful than the creature we know as Satan, which may be why in the Old Testament, when you know what you're looking for, you see more references to this entity than to Satan in the Old Testament. He can't touch you if you know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. So that's the good news, the encouragement in all of this. This book is not intended to frighten anyone, to stir up a spirit of fear, which is not from God, but to show how far our Lord has gone to protect us from this entity, the importance that God places on this rebellion and this particular entity, the connection between this entity and the Mount of Olives, and then the focus that Jesus has had on the Mount of Olives, the last week of his life, divided between the Temple Mount and the Mount of Olives, and his return coming to the Mount of Olives, which will then split in half, Zechariah 14. It's not by coincidence. It's all part of this long war. But our shepherd, Sharon teaches on the 23rd Psalm, and it's beautiful the way she describes it. Said, look, you principalities and powers, you cosmic rulers over this present darkness, you want to touch me? Talk to the shepherd. He's right here, and he's got my back. And that's the good news in all of this.
Amen. Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing I do think. I definitely didn't walk away with this. Is any type of fear or I don't know anything that I don't even feel like anyone would be led down that road reading your book. If anything, you see just how helpless and subservient these gods are to our God. And if anything, it's a faith builder to know that we do have the good shepherd, and that his rod and staff, that they comfort us and they protect us. So it's incredible. Awesome. What a great way to end the episode. So once again, thank you so much for coming on. If you would just close us out in prayer.
Sure. Father, thank you for granting us this time together today, and for this new friendship, this new connection that you've established for us. And I just pray, Father, that if anyone hearing this or seeing this broadcast is uneasy, is suffering spiritually or emotionally right now, Lord, that your Spirit would touch them and draw them to you. Lord, when we read your word and we see that this conflict has been going on for thousands of years, and yet in your love, you knew from the very beginning, even though you've known from the very beginning the rebellion that we would all take part in. As John wrote, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. Lord, you know that none of us measures up to your standard of holiness. And yet, knowing this from the very beginning of creation, you willingly became one of us, walked among us, and sacrificed yourself for us. No greater love has any man than this. So, Father, we just ask that you would Encourage us, lift us with your Spirit. Give us the words to speak and the desire to share the hope that we have in you while we yet have time to work. Lord, we know that the world is growing darker around us, and yet you told us that this would happen. You have seen this from the very beginning, and you have foretold the end. Lord, we look forward to your return, coming over the hill, that heavenly host. We pray, Father, for the strength to hold our ground,
God
stand
bless,
our ground,
mate.
to pull the wounded off the field behind our lines and minister to them until the day you return. Bring justice, true justice, to this world. And until that day, Father, we ask for your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen.
Where is it? No, that's not. This is, yeah.
Over my other channel about a SkyTrain from 1902. As you can see here, rather smooth. Seems like pretty high technology for that time frame. You can see there have nice bridges, beautiful architecture.
Yeah.
Not what you would expect back in the 1900s. A SkyTrain, really? How about Skype? Skype back in 1928, 1935. This here is 1928. This is 1935. I can show you that. Let's see, where is it at? Here we go. Skype back in 1935.
Okay, Shawnee, God bless, mate.
That's kind of weird. It's like almost 100 years ago. They're pretty much doing what we do for a living now. You know, if you work from your home, you're pretty much using something like that. They just don't have a computer. They got Skype, though. I guess they didn't have computers back then. That's something different, right? But actually, we had more advanced technology than even what we saw 100 years ago, probably 200-300 years ago. I'm going to show you a little bit of that as well. You can see here the post office using scooters back 100 years ago to mail. And like I said, this SkyTrain was from 120 years ago. This wasn't 100. This was 120 years ago. Notice the buildings look a lot better than ours. We got Walmart and Slurpees now, folks. They got beautiful architecture. We got pretty much square boxes we live in, right? I mean, literally. That's pretty much what it is, with a little roof on it, you know. Like I said, I'm going to be getting into a lot of interesting stuff. They had buses back then. They even had, I mean, this wasn't 100 years ago, but they actually had some pretty advanced flying contraptions. When I watch this video, it looks just as good as some of the ones they make today. That's the entire thing right there, by the way. There's no propeller. It's using a jet engine, folks. This was like 80 years ago. They're using a jet engine on this. And it looks better than the ones they make today. I mean, it actually flies better. It goes 60 miles an hour. Like, really. They actually made it better back then. And this actually was, they actually picked helicopters over this, by the way. This was the one main thing competing with helicopters back in the early days, like the 50s and stuff. They decided on helicopters and actually abandoned that technology that I just showed you, which is kind of curious, as you can imagine. But like I said, we're going to be getting into a lot of stuff. Here you can see here, 1928, 1935, just like I said. You could literally Skype someone in another city, another state, using a Skype.
Wow.
A phone.
That's pretty
TV,
crazy, you got to
sitting in
admit.
a chair, just like you can do today. And there's actually other technology that makes you really wonder. Let me show you this. This is what really makes me wonder. They had the Crystal Palace that was in Britain, which they couldn't maintain
Queen
it.
Victoria's.
After they got
building.
automatic manufacturing. By the way, my background's mechanical engineering. I studied all this in college. The history of technology, things in this realm. Automated manufacturing was something that came in during the industrial age. Henry Ford was one of the main people to first pioneer this. But what's interesting is even after they had automated manufacturing, they had automatic glass making. They had machines to make glass. They couldn't maintain the Crystal Palace in Britain. They couldn't maintain this building either, the manufacturing building in Chicago. This building, look at this building. Look at this machinery. They're supposed to be showing off their advanced machinery from the industrial age. And look at this building itself. The building itself is something they couldn't even build with this machinery. They couldn't even maintain these buildings. They couldn't maintain the glass structures above it, even after they got automatic. So just imagine, we're told that they didn't have, okay, before automatic glass making, before automated manufacturing, they had horse and buggy and by hand did things, right? So where did this building come from? How did they build this building with horse and buggy and by hand? I'm scratching my head here, folks. This technology inside this building isn't even remotely good enough to manufacture this. I think I have a right to say that. I'm a mechanical engineer. I even studied architectural design. I think I might know a few things. Okay. I'm telling you, it doesn't make sense. And like I mentioned before, you also have the population growth, which is very strange. I'm not showing this best on the screen, but this is basically 1600, 1700, 1800, 1900, and then we had an explosion of population around 1930 or 40 until now. Essentially, they're telling us that there was no population growth for thousands of years. Does that even make any sense? I don't really think so. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You have these water fountains, extremely elaborate water fountains, Versailles, France, that have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. Yet for some reason, in this extremely large building in the background, there's no plumbing, there's no toilets. How is it they were able to move this water and make these magnificent water fountains, as you can see here, that even shoot up at different times? This is old technology. This is not some new stuff they created. Hundreds and hundreds of years old. For some reason, they couldn't put plumbing in the building itself. I don't believe that. So why didn't they put plumbing? Why didn't they put toilets in these castles? Probably because the people using them didn't need the toilet. Why would that be the case? Well, maybe because they were not exactly from here. They weren't you and I. They were a little bit different than you and I. And what do I mean by that? And you're like, what are you talking about, dude? Well, maybe it's because we don't understand our history very well. And I'm going to get into that. If you watch my other video, you might know already what I'm getting at. But we'll be getting into that actually a lot more in this video as we go along. First, though, I've got to mention food supply, 25-year shelf life. Link is in the description. 3 months worth for $5.97. You already spend this much for 1 month worth of food at Kroger, and it don't have no 25-year shelf life. You're going to definitely want to get this, folks. This is the same price they had 4 years ago. Matter of fact, it's even cheaper than it was like 3 years ago. 3 years ago, they were like trying to sell this for $800. They're selling it for cheaper than 3 years ago. Unlike every other company out there. These guys are the ones you want to buy from these guys. Link is in the description if you haven't already bought that. There's also other packages. You can even get, I think there's like a $49 package even for like 1 week worth. Yeah, $127 for 2 weeks worth. Link is in the description. Of course, also this book here, The Lost Ways, How Your Great-Great-Grandfather Lived Without Electricity. Back in the old days, in 1900s, early 1900s, 1800s, back in the rural areas. But actually what's interesting is I think maybe 200, 300, 400 years ago, it might not really have been the case in some cases with regards to the rural areas. They might have also had electricity back then. I'll get into that a little bit in this video. But I do think about 100, 150 years ago, you'd be hard-pressed to find any electricity out in the rural areas, and they were able to live without it. You might want to get this book just in case, because you might have something like that happen to you, considering all the stuff that's been going on around us, that WAR that seems to never end. It could turn into something much larger. Who knows? It could be whatever reason. You can't afford electricity anymore. That was an issue for a while, particularly in Europe, about half a year ago. Link is in the description. Hundreds of pages illustrated how to do things around the house, recipes, all manner of stuff, how to build a cellar, et cetera, et cetera. Link is in the description for that. Same price it's been 4 years ago as well. $37 with shipping. Also, if you want to support us on Noah VR, the game we're designing, you can actually get involved and be able to make money in the process. $400 put in, and you can get a share of profits. You can get the 400 plus more back when we release the game, folks. Link is in the description. If we're even halfway successful with this, you're going to make multifold over the $400, folks. Link is in the description. Again, we have one of the top programmers in the world. We're already halfway done with the game. We've been working on it for 2 years. I've been paying the guy the entire time to work on this for me. One of the top level VR programmers in the world. On top of that, we're looking to hire, and we already, thanks to a lot of you, we've already gotten a lot of money in it already. And we're able to already speed up the process. We were already able to buy some software that really helped out to speed up the process and cut out a lot of man hours. We're also interviewing people right now. We have a number of guys that we want to bring on board. We don't have enough money to bring all the ones we want to bring on board yet. But if we do raise some more money, we will be able to bring on some guys that work on Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, Transformers on the team. They actually ask our programmer for advice on how to do VR. We're also going to be making a standard version. We're using the VR to get our foot in the door with PlayStation and Xbox. After that, then we'll have the standard version as well, which will probably sell more copies even on top of it. And we're going to be releasing it on Steam as well. And I mean, if we're even halfway successful, it could be at $200 million. There's one game that made $200 million in 1 year. It started out very similar manner, very grassroots. But anyway, check that out. Link is in the description. Of course, my website, also a link is in the description. If you're looking for more videos like this one here, check it out, grvideos.com. Link is in the description for that. Let's get back to the video. So what was I talking about? I'm trying to remember what I was in. Okay, so I was getting into, oh yeah, the water fountains. That's what I was talking about. So these water fountains are very interesting, and they really tell you a story. I feel like this architecture in the past tells a story that they don't tell us in the classroom. Because honestly, looking at this from an architectural standpoint, from a mechanical engineering standpoint, this does not make any sense. How is it we have buildings back hundreds of years ago that defy explanation? Here we have an island in Normandy, France, which is essentially has no roads to it. They put roads to it now, but it didn't have roads to it at one time. They have a type.
Okay, I know this has got nothing to do with Jesus or Christ or God and all that, but I just thought this would be interesting. And I think he's showing some interesting photos.
That comes in and it actually fills up the area. This absolutely stunning cathedral. Okay, this is Mount St. Michael. Unbelievable architecture. It makes literally no sense. What's going on here? Why is there this? This is like the Disney World logo. I mean, it literally is.
Yeah, Sean, he's a great guy, isn't he? We got a good crew here, haven't we, Di? We got a really good crew here.
This is probably where they got their idea from, was from this island, from Mount St. Michael. You look at the architecture inside that thing, it's just unbelievable. And I didn't have it open, but I could show you some. It's just really amazing. But they tell us the story behind it doesn't even make sense. They claim that St. Michael, the angel, told him to build it in his honor, which makes no sense. Why would an angel tell you to honor him? That sounds like a fallen type of angel, not an actual normal angel. Yeah. Michael, the archangel, would have not said something like that, but they claim this is what he said. It's very obvious he wouldn't have said something like that if you understand how the teaching goes. But let me see if I can get inside the building, or inside. Let's try this. Inside. There we go. As you can see here, supposedly they built this with horse and buggy. They somehow transplanted all this stone structure and built this on a little mountain in the ocean. So how did they transfer all this stuff over there? How did they build this with horse and buggy? Tell me that. I want to know the answer to that one, folks. Okay,
they obviously build it, so we don't know how. So what does that mean?
It just doesn't make any sense. Look at this. That's the courtyard right there.
I don't get his point on this one. He's saying, when did they build it? How could they build it? But here it is, it's built. I don't get his point on this one.
If we don't build anything like this, even if it's in an area easy to get to, we don't build anything like this today. So my whole point is that you can see that something different was happening a few hundred years ago. They had buildings that we couldn't even maintain that ended up going into obscurity and essentially being taken down, like the Crystal Palace in Britain, or the manufacturers building in Chicago, which of course they used in the Chicago World Fair in 1893. But they claim they built it in 1893, and I have a hard time believing that because it housed 300,000 people. Where is that at? I got a picture of that around here somewhere, where it shows half the building filled with people. Yeah, here we go. I've shown this as an icon before. I'm trying to think of the best way I could show this. Here we go. This is only half the building here. You're looking actually from the halfway point to one side. They supposedly built this with horse and buggy. I don't know about you, but that just seems extremely unbelievable. I don't believe they built this with horse and buggy. I don't even think we could build this today. We don't even have a building that can house 300,000 people today. We have no building that can house this many people.
But it was built.
So how
So
did they
what's
build
your
it back
point?
then? If we can't even build it today, we don't even have any buildings. I think the biggest one we have is 180,000 housed. That's like the biggest. We don't have no 300,000. Who built this? Why couldn't they maintain it? Doesn't even make sense. But anyway, so we're going to get into how these water fountains had plumbing, this elaborate plumbing, but the buildings themselves didn't have restrooms. It's because they didn't need them. Why wouldn't they not need them? Because maybe we're living in a time that you don't understand. Okay, let me explain this out. And I did a little bit on the other video. I've talked about this guy before. The fact that no one knows these things is the problem. If in reality, if we were living in a standard, of course, world where people could communicate freely and do whatever they wanted, these would all be known. These would be all well known. The fact that there is a pope named 66.
Diane, your country's in desperate trouble. You know that. Just that issue alone puts your country at great risk. Just that issue alone. Oh, man, things are really ramping up. This is getting scary.
Another 6. This literally in Latin means that. This term here is the number 6. Sixtus is Latin.
I've already
for 6.
done this one
3 times. It says to watch out for this number in Revelation. No one knows this guy existed for some reason. But what's interesting about it is he was friends with St. Augustine. St. Augustine's like one of the most famous people in the church. How is it no one knows this guy existed? He was friends with St. Augustine. Are you kidding me? No one knows this guy existed. And this.
Following their surprising success, Steamhunk are planning a multi-city world tour, playing 5 cities in 9 days. Manager Rodney has to book all the flights.
And this is not the only person. There's like a ton of these type of things. And what really made me realize that there's something going on here is the fact that I found a number of things that no one knows that everyone should know. Everyone should know that guy existed. I never learned about that growing up.
Diane, that's when God pours out his spirit on the final generation, isn't it? Is that the great revival you're talking about?
I used to read tons of books when I first became a believer. Tons. I read like about Pope history back then. I remember reading about all the popes. I never heard of this guy. Even when I read about all the popes, they never talked about this guy. Not even once. Then, of course, there's a historical event that happened in AD 66 that no one knows about. I used to read tons of reference books. I literally had this thick book like this. You're not supposed to read it. I was like obsessed with reading stuff. It's called The Treasury of Scripture Knowledge. It's not a book you read. You don't read this book, okay? It's like a reference book. And I was reading it. That's how I was. I was reading like thick books. You're not supposed to read, okay? As you can see, this is only a fraction of the books. I actually sold a ton of books. I used to have a lot more, and I sold a bunch.
Okay, that was part of the first video of his I showed. So we've already seen that. I'll do some sky watch and hang up, guys.
Don't completely understand the critical role that these texts played in human history. But this is not the case for the ancients who read and studied these books diligently, including, by the way, Peter and Jude, whose New Testament letters directly quote from Enoch. As a result, did God's people understand the person and purposes of Jesus Christ in a way that we don't comprehend today? Is the Son of Man from Enoch the same Son of Man from the Gospels? And if so, what do the apocryphal texts say regarding this Messiah? Find out right here, right now on Skywatch TV. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Skywatch TV. I'm Joe Artis Horn. Today, once again, we have a completely loaded panel of some of the greatest intellects that I know personally. I'm going to introduce them to you right now. He's a multi-time critically acclaimed best-selling author and CEO of Skywatch Television, Dr. Thomas Horn. She's a legend and pioneer of podcast radio, Christian television personality, and best-selling author of the Red Wing Saga, Sharon Gilbert.
But Diane, God does pour his spirit out on in the final days. I don't know if that's a great revival, but apparently we're going to do greater things than the apostles done. I don't know if that's a revival, though.
His broadcasting career has spanned for more than 40 years. He's the best-selling author of the groundbreaking books Last Clash of the Titans, The Great Inception, and The Second Coming of Saturn, Mr. Derek Gilbert.
I'm just on the second coming of Saturn. Okay.
She is a credentialed, ordained reverend with a degree in Bible and theology, a powerful voice in Christian television, Donna Howell. She's the host of the popular Christian television program for women, the Simply His Coffee Shop. Please welcome my beautiful wife, Catherine Horn. If you missed last week's program, I think it was fire. You must go back. We were talking about this giant as I attempt to lift it. Massive, here we go. I'm getting my exercise in for the day. Defender Family Bible, limited edition, King James Version with expanded Apocrypha. It's a program you simply must go back and check out. For reference, this is...
Man, that sounds like a cool book.
My hand, if you can see how giant that spine is. This thing weighs, I'm going to guess, 7 pounds. Is that accurate?
Probably it's about 8.
Maybe 7 or 8 pounds. Yeah, she's the one that works with our UPS app. She would know. But ladies and gentlemen, if you missed last week, you got to go back. It was basically a clinic on all of the extra biblical books that were not included in the original text of what we know as canon scripture, but books like Jasher, Jubilee, Enoch. Mm-hmm. And of course, people have talked for decades and decades and decades about scripture, why these were very important to some of the ancients that considered them not necessarily equal with the Bible, but the historical accounts of what was happening culturally, as Donna explained last week, that had heavy influence over some of the authors in what became scripture. And certainly their record of the times that they were living in, of course, when they were writing. So it's this very fascinating delve into why a book like this has such tremendous value. If you missed last week, of course, my father, Dr. Thomas Horn, explained that he lost his original book of Enoch in a house fire, and he went to reach for it one day and realized, wait a minute, my book of Enoch is gone, along with the rest of my library, and if that book is important to me, it is very likely important to other scholars, researchers, and people curious for the historical account. I want to get right back into this today because we have a special offer that is just mind-boggling. And I'll tell you about it in just a minute, but it amounts to $1,400 in various ebooks, PDFs, and of course, this book here, which would be, if you went to a Bible bookstore, which would likely be sitting on the shelf for at least $200 by itself. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But first, the context of the program, Donna Howell. Let's dive in. Scholars like Dr. Michael Heiser say that some of these apocryphal books that I just mentioned, are crucial to understanding the Second Temple context of Scripture, and therefore, of course, the identity and purposes of Christ. But for those joining us, for those that are unfamiliar with the premise, the context, what does that mean?
So, and you mentioned Dr. Heiser in his book, Reversing Hermon, he writes, and I quote, "If you were to ask a Christian today why the world is messed up, why the world is the way that it is, they would say it's because of the fall. But that," and I quote Dr. Heiser.
So, Diane, that's 2 books we got to get. Gary Wayne's Genesis 6 Conspiracy Book 2 and this one here. This one sounds really good too.
Writing here. That is not what a second...
And the main Bible part, not the Apocrypha part, the Bible part is the King James Bible. So that's why I like this version.
Temple Jew would have said. So when you got to go back to the Second Temple era. What did the Jews believe? Not only what did they believe of the Old Testament and books like Enoch, but what did they believe of their Messiah? This is where we get into some extremely important kind of a threefold answer that they had. If you asked a Second Temple era Jew or an intertestamental period Jew why the world is messed up, they would give you threefold answer. Not just the fall of man, although that's the second part of it. The first part of it is the fall of the Watchers from Enochian literature, directly out of not only Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4, which is kind of where we get the platform for that in the canonical word, but also straight out of the book of Enoch. The third part of that answer, of course, is when Israel embraced idolatry because of the influence of the pagan nations. So you have this threefold answer. Now, understand this. They were not expecting a Messiah to only fix one part of this threefold problem. To the first century Jew, the Second Temple era Jew, or the intertestamental period culture, they were expecting a Messiah that would fix all three of those things. Now, as I said last week, Genesis 6, 1 through 4 had a supernatural understanding, a supernatural rendering. They understood that to be the account of the fallen angels as described in Enoch until the 4th century. It was not until very recent history, the 4th century, that it was even questioned whether or not this Enochian literature would help to define what we read in Genesis 6, 4. And prior to that, of course, Genesis 6, 1 through 4 is written from what scholars completely understand. Worldwide, they understand it to be a Mesopotamian context. In other words, Genesis was written as a refutation of the Mesopotamian legends of the 7 wise sages called the Apkallo, who are, of course, around before the flood. So everything that we read about Genesis is understood through that worldview. Jesus's role in the New Testament, the verses that are describing where he goes and what he does, is also completely defined by the Enochian literature. Just to give you a couple of examples, a demon in the New Testament to a Second Temple era Jew, a demon. This is right out of Mike Heiser's book, Reversing Hermon, that the Second Temple Jew believed demons were the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim who were defeated in the Old Testament flood. So every time we read demon in New Testament literature, we understand that is the disembodied spirit of the offspring of the Watchers who descended on Mount Hermon. Now, in Matthew 16, 13 through 20, we get to this moment where Jesus says, "Who do you say I am? Who do they say I am?" And they have this exchange. And then Jesus says, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Funny enough, scholars have been going round and around and around and around trying to figure out if the rock is Peter, because Peter also translates to the word stone and this and that and all these different things. No. Jesus is saying upon this rock. They're literally standing on a rock called Mount Hermon in the area of Bashan.
This 9,200-foot mountain that we're standing in front
By
of.
the gate to hell.
Yeah, the Grotto of Pan, this big cave right over here that's the source of the Jordan River. And according to the first century Jewish historian Josephus, they've never been able to lower a plumb line deep enough to hit bottom. They believed it was literally a bottomless cave, the entrance to the netherworld.
Exactly.
So when you go there and you understand this is where Jesus said this, on this rock, I'll build my ecclesia, my congregation, and the gates of hell, which is this big cave right over here, will not prevail against it. The apostles, disciples would have known exactly what he was saying.
Right.
In fact, when we've had the opportunity to do that, you just want to hear like 100 people go, oh, all at once. You show them
happens every
peace.
time we
That's
do
right.
this.
Imagine descending that hole with safety ropes and that, and lights. That'd be interesting to see what they seen.
These are the gates of hell.
Yeah, well, and don't forget that the area of Bashan at the foot of Mount Hermon was literally in Old Testament times called the gates of hell.
Exactly. And the area was a place
Upon
of the
this
serpent.
rock, Mount Hermon, I will build my
Yes.
church, and
Yes.
the gates of hell will not prevail against it. We do not understand what's going on with Jesus until we understand the Enochian worldview.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yes, absolutely.
I'll also say the Mount of Transfiguration from Matthew 17, Mark 9, and Luke 9. The Mount of Transfiguration, you get this beautiful moment where there is clearly a ground being claimed here.
Mhm.
This whole thing, well, scholars believed that that was Mount Tabor, but it again was not interpreted to be Mount Tabor until the 4th century. Prior to that, it was well known that the Mount of Transfiguration was a reclaiming of the ground where? Mount Hermon, the area of Bashan, where the Watchers descended in the Book of Enoch and decided that they were going to thwart humanity. So over and over and over again, this is Jesus reversing Hermon. That's exactly what Mike Heiser's book is about. One more. The exorcism of Legion in Mark 5, the demons recognized then and there, when Jesus cast out Legion, that he was the Lord over this region. Where did that happen? Again, the foot of Mount Hermon in the area of Bashan, right at the foot of where the original Watchers descended.
Yes.
And Donna, part of the reason why between me and Mike Kaiser, we came up with that title, Reversing Hermon, is because even the Transfiguration that you mentioned, what you see is this is where the angels came down. They set aside their glory. They cast off what they were in heaven, and they took themselves into bodies like this to come down onto Mount Hermon. Jesus literally reverses this. He goes up there in a body of flesh, and he's transfigured, and he becomes glorified. So once you understand the Enochian, the worldview based on the book of Enoch, line by line, you can follow Jesus like, he's doing it again.
I know.
He is literally just in their face with his repudiation. The disciples are loving it, right?
Right.
I love it too because by transfiguring on that mountain, he's showing up in the assembly of El, who is the chief of the local gods. And that threshing floor is where El supposedly will call his demonic horde back to body form. In other words, he's saying, I'm going to resurrect all of you demons and give you bodies again. That's a lie. And Jesus shows up in his territory. I love it.
Yeah. The best way to think about Mount Hermon is it is essentially the Canaanite Mount Olympus.
Yes.
It is where the gods of the Canaanites met. And so this would just be an archaeological curiosity if Jesus hadn't paid so much attention to it.
There's a temple on the top of Mount Hermon and a sort of a threshing floor shaped wall that forces you to go anti-clockwise. That's all part of that historic monument to El, and Jesus showed up there.
Wow.
And that was the whole point of my book, The Second Coming of Saturn. And El was the god that the Romans called Saturn, but he was known as Shemiyaza back in the days of Jared when they descended on Mount Hermon. And in the end times, he will be known as the Destroyer, Abaddon, Apollyon.
Yeah. Now, Derek, in the Defender Family Bible, of course, as I said at the onset of the program, here I am lifting it again, the Book of Enoch. And that's a very fascinating book. A lot of people have lots of questions about what it is. And for those that have never read the Book of Enoch, I encourage you to do it. We have moved, I can't tell you how many thousands of just the Book of Enoch by itself in hard print, that Defender version of Enoch that you put out. And if you missed last week, Tom gave a really good explanation about how if you go online and you try to go to the public domain, the versions that you may discover could be edited.
Yeah.
Or as my daughter would say, remixed.
Yeah.
Or basically, let's just play jazz. Let's rearrange. This is my version of the Book of Enoch. But if you want the truest, most authentic versions, you have to look to academia. Yeah, Joe, that's absolutely true. And this is why we paid so much attention to detail when we put the first version of this Bible together, however many years ago it's been. And I did work with Dr. Heiser, and I wound up using the Book of Enoch that he recommended. And the other books, J.R. Church, Gary Stearman, that's the versions that they thought were the most trustworthy and the best translated. And so I stuck with these collegiate level versions of those books. I didn't want to trust getting something off the internet because might get surprised later on when someone says, hey man, your Bible is all messed up. Right. So, right. On the Book of Enoch, last week we talked about the 2 sections of Enoch, one of which was called the Book of Parables. When was this book written, and why is this particular section of Enoch so important?
Well, actually, what we call the Book of Enoch is actually First Enoch. There's a Second Enoch and a Third Enoch that were written into the Christian era. So they're interesting for academics, but not really relevant to Christians. The Book of First Enoch actually has 5 sections, but the 2 that are most important to us, Donna was talking about the Book of Watchers, which is chapters 1 through 36. The second section in the book, chapters 37 through 71, is called the Book of Parables. And this was actually the last section of First Enoch. It was written in the 1st century BC, and this is really new research. We're talking about stuff that's only been discussed by a group of scholars who call themselves the Enoch Seminar that focus on the Book of Enoch within the last 10 years. And some of this research is only like published last August. So this is really new stuff. They conclude that this book was written and finished just about the time of the death of Herod the Great, which means just before the birth of John the Baptist and the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. So this was the last section. This really is the last stuff in the expanded Apocrypha to be written before Jesus arrived on the scene.
How important is this Son of Man that you hear about in the Book of Parables?
And that's really the reason that the Book of Parables is so important. The first 36 chapters deals with the sin of the watchers. And that's why Donna was so correct in saying, as Mike Heiser pointed out in Reversing Hermann, that Jews of that period of history, 1st century AD, would have said, yeah, the world's in a mess because of the sin of these rebellious Elohim who came down and commingled their seed with the seed of humanity and taught us all these things we weren't supposed to know, like sorcery and witchcraft and how to make weapons of war. Beginning with chapter 37, the Book of Parables is strictly prophetic, and it prophesies the coming of an agent of justice, God's divine agent of justice, who is called by a number of names: the Anointed One, the Chosen One, and the Son of Man. Now, we see Jesus use that title of himself in the New Testament. It's used like 82 times in the New Testament, and most of the time, like about 76 times, it's Jesus speaking that term of himself. In fact, that's one of the things he asked his disciples at the foot of Mount Hermon at Caesarea Philippi. Who do people say the Son of Man is? Which suggests that they were familiar with that term, that title, and the fact that he was this divine agent of retribution, God's justice. Most Bible teachers will say, well, this comes from the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 7, where Daniel has a vision of the throne room of God, and he sees the Ancient of Days, and next to him is one like a son of man. One like a son of man, which is a Hebrew idiom that means a human. You got the Ancient of Days there, can't really make him out, but next to him is one looks like a human. And he receives an everlasting kingdom. Dominion will never be taken away. But he doesn't do anything in the book of Daniel. But in the book of First Enoch, the Book of Parables, chapters 37 to 71, he's the one who comes and condemns the sinful angels, Azazel and his minions. He punishes wicked kings, evil landlords, and those who have rebelled against the authority of God. In the Book of Parables, for the first time in any Jewish writing in history, you see the Son of Man as playing an active role as the Messiah. And then Jesus arrives 30 years after this book was written and applies that title to himself, validating the Book of First Enoch.
And the writers of these parables were a branch of the Essenes who lived in the very region that we're talking about, Bashan. They live right there, which is sort of like a cliff. And there are lots and lots of caves in it when you look up there. It's across from Magdala, really close to where the apostles were called. Jesus did most of his ministry in Bashan, in the region of Mount Hermon. And he was aware of all of these writings that the Essenes have written. And John the Baptist may well have studied with these Essenes.
And this is something that we weren't aware of until just very recently. And again, this is all very new research by these.
Yeah, the Essenes. I've only learned about the Essenes in the last 6 months with Ken Johnson. But so far, I'm really intrigued by it. I think the Essenes and Ken Johnson's interpretations are really brilliant. I think they're really, really wholly inspired.
Enochian scholars who concluded that, yes, the Book of Parables, this most recent section of the Book of First Enoch, was probably written near the Sea of Galilee, this village of caves. A bunch of hermits living in caves 200 feet off. They had to use rope ladders literally to get in and out of their cave homes. But they could look down and they could see Capernaum, where Jesus based his ministry. They could see Bethsaida, which is where the first 3 disciples lived, who were called Andrew, Peter, and Philip.
Mm-hmm.
And in the northern horizon, you could see Mount Hermon. They lived in the north. That's where Jesus based his ministry. And we argue that that is also the same region where Jesus was baptized. So Jesus was baptized there, based his ministry there, declared his divinity there.
Wow.
All in the north. And it was a group of Essenes. Again, not until recently did we realize there was a split in the Essene community that took place around the year 100 BC, where the group that were followers of the teacher of righteousness, those who really believed they needed to separate from the world, they went south to Qumran, the Dead Sea. And that's why most people associate the Essenes with Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls. The group living at the Arvel Cave village near the city of Magdala, where Mary Magdalene was from, they were a little more moderate. Yes, they still had their purity laws. It was all men in the community, but they didn't object to guys getting married, and they would have jobs among the community. They were a little more moderate in their beliefs, but they are the ones who produced this document called the Book of Parables, which saw the coming of the Son of Man, and very, very soon.
Right. Well, I'm going to ask in just a minute, too, what all of this did, in your view, to influence the writings of the New Testament. But before we get into that, we want to make sure that you know how you can get your copy of this incredible, one-of-a-kind Bible with expanded Apocrypha in the Last Chance Defender Bible package. Right now, while supplies last, we're offering this giant limited edition Defender Family Bible for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling. But if that wasn't enough, we're also including the Defender Publishing's 120 ebook collection absolutely free. Now, this data DVD library collection includes 120 of Defender's all-time best-selling books featuring authors like Dr. Thomas Warren, Derek Gilbert, Carl Gallups, Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, Sharon Gilbert, Allie Henson, Donna Howell, Terry James, the late, great Michael Heiser, and so many more, too many to number. This DVD library also includes the limited edition Defender Bible with expanded Apocrypha, and all of these books in this collection come in popular ebook formats so you can read them on EPUB, PDF, Kindle, and other handheld electronic devices. It's devices of your choosing wherever you go, including the Bible that we're talking about today. These items hold a retail value of $1,400 if you had to buy all of these ebooks separately. Yours now for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling, so don't delay. You can scan the QR code on your screen right now using the camera app on your phone for instant access to this special offer. You can also visit us at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985 and ask for the Last Chance Defender Bible package right now.
This would make a really, really amazing Christmas gift too for all of the people in your life that love to do research, or your pastor. So buy it now and save it and give it to them for Christmas.
Oh, that's a great idea. Just stash it somewhere.
Yeah.
Good idea.
You might be wondering, what is the catch? How can I get all of that for $35 donation? And I said it in the last show, there is no catch. This is just because my father wants you to have these books. Derek, getting right back into it with just a few minutes left on the clock, how did all of what you guys were describing about the various locations, the Book of Parables, where it was written, what was going on at the time, how did that influence the writings of the New Testament?
Well, as we discussed before the break, the use of the term the Son of Man as a prophesied savior comes right out of the Book of Parables in First Enoch. I don't argue that they were probably inspired by the Book of Daniel, but they developed it further. And By the time John the Baptist was preaching and Jesus arrived on the scene, the ground had been prepared in that area north of the Sea of Galilee, where you had this Essene community living near the city of Magdala. In fact, John the Baptist, many scholars believe, was a member of the Essenes.
Diane, I'd pay $35 just for the King James Bible and I can't say this word properly, apocrypha books, the ones with Jasher, Enoch. I'd just buy just for that. Yet you get all these other things with it. These guys are real. They're not like Paul Begley, are they?
But they will often put John's ministry down in the south near Jericho, near the Dead Sea, because they assumed that the Essenes were all at Qumran. That's not true. We know from Josephus and another Jewish historian in the first century, Philo of Alexandria, that there were about 4,000 Essenes living in the land of Israel, or the land of Judea. There were not 4,000 people living at Qumran. It just wasn't that big. They were all over. They were in Jerusalem. They were scattered throughout, and they had this little cave village of hermits who were writing this book in the last century before the birth of Jesus. And in there, you see for the first time in Jewish writings the idea that you could be forgiven by repenting rather than by fulfilling the law. And according to the Essenes at Qumran, following all of their rules as well, which is, I think, why you have not found, or scholars have not found, any section of the book of parables among the writings at the Dead Sea Scrolls, because there are teachings in there that were not compatible with the teachings of the Essenes at Qumran. So John the Baptist arrives on the scene preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. This is new. This is radical. This was not something that the Essenes at Qumran would have taught. It's certainly nothing that the priests in Jerusalem would have taught as well. This was a new thing.
Well, and also the fact that John the Baptist is described as the voice of one crying in the wilderness, which is taken out of the book of Enoch.
Absolutely.
So you can see that both